Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 41 of the Former Action Guys podcast. I'm your host, Justin Kramer, and this week we have Ashley Smentek on the show. He is a retired deputy sheriff, and he now runs a company called Gold Hill Canine. So we get into all kinds of stuff. Not only did he work as a patrol officer, he also served as part of a helicopter team and worked for 3 years within the jail system. We talk a lot about recent officer-involved shootings. I mean, you may be familiar with like the UPS truck shooting in Florida. We talk about school shootings and the what the officers are supposed to do in response and how that's kind of changed over the years and stuff like that. He has a really good perspective on some of those matters and the use of like body cams and other recording devices and stuff like this. So it's really interesting, and it brings a lot of context to situations that civilians may not have considered previously. Obviously, it's another really good episode. I even told him, I was like, man, we didn't even get into some of the stuff I really wanted to talk about. So he's definitely going to be a guest on the show again in the future. And I hope some people give some feedback on some stuff or I put out some questions. He's the first non-military person I've had on the show. As always, if you're not watching this video, then make sure you subscribe to the Former Action Guys podcast YouTube channel if you haven't already. You may have noticed also we got a new logo, so hopefully you like that. Check that out and stuff like that. Make sure you give a like and leave comments under your favorite episodes. I'd also like you to leave a review if you're listening on Apple Podcast. It's one of the only platforms that allows reviews, so it's really important that if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, that you leave a review so that people that are checking out different podcasts see that this one is a quality show with quality content. So I'd really like for you guys that are on Apple to hop over and leave a review, and I'll read it out and I'll screenshot it and put it up on different platforms. I use it to help promote the page as well. And then finally, make sure to check out my website, jkramergraphics.com, and my Instagram page at jkramergraphics. That's jkramergraphics.com and at jkramergraphics on Instagram. You can also email any questions you have to the Former Action Guys podcast at gmail.com. Again, Former Action Guys podcast at gmail.com. And that's it. So enjoy the episode. Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Thanks for coming on the show, man. Welcome to the Former Action Guys podcast.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So I guess we'll just jump right in. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us where you're from and kind of your background, and then I'll go through and ask questions to kind of pick out details that that I might have questions about.
Yeah, that works for me. So my name's Ashley Smentek. I'm from Northern California, born and raised up here. Grew up kind of in the North Bay area my whole life. Went into law enforcement kind of early on. I graduated the academy in 97 and spent, what would that be now, about 23-ish years. I'm in the process of retiring. I guess you can say my retirement's official as of last summer, even though one part of it is not, but we'll call myself officially retired. So the better part of 20 years, my entire adult life was spent in law enforcement. I worked for Roseville Police Department for 9 years and then Pulaski County Sheriff for the remainder of that. I guess I met you via a friend, Rob Myers, that was a client of ours. We actually do some dog training. That's one of the things that got me into law enforcement was working with police dogs early on. I had aspirations to be a firefighter. Back then, it was incredibly difficult to be one, and started working with some guys and their police dogs and stood out there and got bit a whole bunch and kind of fell in love with that. And they convinced me that I should go into the police academy. And so I did. And that was a career goal of mine that never quite came to fruition, but I spent a lot of time doing it, a lot of time coming back to it. After my career took a couple other paths that were super awesome. But that one thing eluded me, but it helped me open a business training dogs. And that's how I met Rob. We actually trained a couple of his dogs and then started working some protection stuff with his German Shepherd. And so that's what I'm doing today is trying to enjoy retirement, trying to navigate life after all that, and train some dogs.
So most of the people that have come on the show are military. Everybody so far, I think, has been military. But I can see the same kind of issues that military people have, being issues that police officers and stuff like have. Like when you leave that service, it's like it doesn't feel like you should be done yet. You feel like you have something left to do. Even if you didn't retire, for me, like I only did 12 years. I did only 12 years. I did 12 years in the Marine Corps, and you separate from it, and sometimes you're like, oh man, I'm glad I'm walking away finally, but then you get that separation anxiety and stuff as well. It definitely comes out because you got to find a purpose.
Yeah,
I think that's an issue a lot of people have.
Yeah, and I can definitely say that that's been a struggle. I was fortunate in my career to be in a super specialized unit as well. I was in air support for 5 years as a part-time gig with Roseville, and then transferred over to Placer County and did it full-time for 5 years. And during that time, we were in the process of purchasing and then acquired a new helicopter. So it ramped up our capabilities. We were able to do some search and rescue stuff that we'd never been able to do before with a hoist and all kinds of stuff. So not only did I have a great job being in law enforcement, but I had a pinnacle job within that very few officers ever get to even be in something like that. And then within air support, not only did we chase bad guys, but we got to go do search and rescue stuff. And as a cop, you typically don't get to play in that realm. So I had the best job ever. Separating from that caused a lot of stress in the way that it happened. And I think a lot of that was unresolved. And then was in an on-duty shooting a couple of years ago now. And that's kind of what changed everything for me. And then you're exactly right. Separating from that world. I think however you do it, if you go your full 30 years and attain that retirement, have your nice little party, and they give you your duty weapon and pat you on the back, I think that's still hard for a lot of people. I have a lot of good friends that have reached that point in life. It's weird now for me to be my age and be retired, number one, but also have friends that are getting really close to retirement. All the people I came up with are approaching retirement. The people I looked up to have just retired. So it's a different phase in life. And I think no matter how you go about it, it's hard to adjust from something like the military or law enforcement to civilian life. And then on top of that, adjusting, getting out almost against your will, of going out on a medical leave and not having that picturesque retirement has been really a struggle, because one day you're doing this and the next day you're not. And I tell my fiance regularly, there's nothing I'll do in life that is as badass as the stuff I got to do in law enforcement. They're just not. Yeah. And so how to make sense of that, how to navigate life after that, and find healthy ways of fulfilling those needs that those of us that are drawn to these types of careers, we're drawn to it for a reason. And so how do we navigate that back into regular life? Hopefully in some really healthy ways. I know a lot of friends that don't. My brother's actually in the military. He's Army National Guard and deployed to Afghanistan as a medevac pilot. And so we share a lot of similar stuff. And I see that world with those guys. I've been fortunate to hang out with a lot of his crew up in Alaska on some retreats and stuff. And, those guys carry a lot of baggage too. We have a lot of similarities, even though our worlds and jargon are different. The sense of tribe and the sense of camaraderie is it's a huge thing.
Yeah. I mean, and it comes to me, I think it comes from the fact that, that any day something bad could happen and you could be gone. And it's funny, I was talking to my neighbor. I was actually talking to my old neighbor yesterday. I was doing some filming for him. He runs a bratwurst company. So I was doing some film for him, like making pretzel buns. And we were just we started talking about this thing called, it's a Joint Fires Observer in the Marine Corps. And that's usually a fire support man, a guy that forward observer, but he has been trained how to talk to aircraft as well. He can do a lot of stuff that a JTAC can do. If you've ever heard of a JTAC, they call in airstrikes and stuff like that. He's just not allowed to give ground clearance for final like ordnance drops and stuff like that. And I was just talking to him about how it's similar, because he used to work in the corporate environment, and you're training people as they come up to take over your job or be ready to do something like that. And I was kind of like, in the Marine Corps, like you have this Joint Fires Observer, I have my JFO, and I'm training him. Like, if I get smoked in the head, bro, like you got to take over and like save the day. And he was just like, what? Because he's a non-military guy. He's like, what? I'm like, dude, that's like the reality of it though. Like, and you kind of get used to like, that's the reality of it. That's the reality of my job, is like, especially in combat. Now obviously here at stateside, you want it to be it should be a lot safer. It's still kind of a dangerous job for forward observers and stuff because, you're blowing shit up, and there's been a ton of like training accidents stateside. But overseas, it's definitely, you never know when something's going to happen. And that kind of stress, though, police officers have to deal with it every day. There's no like, 7 months of this and then come home for a year and then go back and do it for 7 months. It's an everyday thing. So I imagine that definitely wears on you after a while. And I want to get into like some of the stress and stuff like that, but I want to start off with like what your career kind of entailed. I know you just did like a broad brush of it. At what point did you decide to become a police officer, and where was like how did the application process go for you at that time?
Yeah. Like I said, I really wanted to be in the fire service. I'd gone to EMT school. I went and applied for a job as a EMT ambulance driver. And when I showed up there was probably 8 of us, and 6 of them had paramedic licenses. And I thought, oh shit, man, that's going to be a tough route. If I have to go to paramedic school to simply drive an ambulance as an EMT, that's a ton more schooling. So as I was mulling that over, it was about the time I started messing around with dogs. I had a Rottweiler at the time. He needed training. The lady that I happened to link up with was a canine trainer and was becoming a canine officer right at that point in time for the agency I ended up working for. And so in the process of being in that world, I thought, well, this is really similar to the fire service. The fire service is what most of my family was involved in. So that was what I knew. I'm the first person in my family in law enforcement. So that was a bit of a change. But I thought, well, this is really similar.
Did you catch a lot of shit for that? That's kind of like Army Marines because, police officers and fire dudes. I follow a couple different police and fire Instagram pages, and it's just constant talking shit back and forth.
Oh,
like
man.
who's at the call first?
Ever.
It's good stuff.
So my grandfather, he retired as a captain from Burbank. My great uncle was LA County Fire. My uncle worked for Burbank Fire for 30 years. So yeah, giving those guys nothing but grief about, frankly, it's as firefighters, their job is to sit there and wait down the street until we make it safe for them. And they're extremely good at hanging out in their recliners, wearing shorts and kicking ass and looking awesome when they go into the store with their big, huge rig parked outside. My standard joke is that they go everywhere except to the store, code 3, which is lights and sirens. And, I got asked a lot in my career, what's the difference between law enforcement and firefighters? And, because we get compared quite regularly as first responders, public servants. And while there's a ton of similarities, and we obviously love those guys more than anything, and we'd have their backs in a heartbeat, our jobs couldn't be further from difference. And the way that I describe people is, anytime you see a fire engine go by or one's behind you and you pull over, you're always like, those guys are going to save somebody's life. They're going to do good. Oh my gosh, thankfully they're here. Even though you small kitchen fire and they kick your door in and cut holes in your roof and flood your house with 30,000 gallons of water, you're like, thank you. You saved everything for me. And I can 100% guarantee you there's never been a person in the world that had a cop behind them, whether we had our lights on or not, that was like, oh, I'm so glad that guy's following me right now. Like, I bet you he's here just to pull me over and thank me for being a great citizen. And it's really the difference between we show up when people are in crisis in a similar fashion. Obviously we go to medical call together, accidents and stuff like that. But we show up when people are in crisis, and it's not good. You're not having your best day in life when law enforcement shows up. It's some sort of trauma, some sort of crisis. I mean, it could even just be an argument with your neighbor, just something minor, but it's not good stuff. And that's really the difference, I think, at the end of the day, between those two careers, even though there's a lot of similarities. But yeah, I mean, we definitely love those guys, but we give nonstop shit.
I don't know why people would really compare them, because like you said, they're incomparable. It's 2 completely different jobs, both of them serving the public. The thing about cops get a bad rap just because of the 10%, just like guys in the military get a bad rap. There's always that 10% of dudes that maybe shouldn't be there or do something wrong. And, and everyone looks at like people that are in government or in power positions, kind of like the military or law enforcement. as you're supposed to have like a zero defect mentality, you know, where you're not allowed to do anything wrong. Like you're not allowed to be like a normal human being, you know, even though like you have normal human emotions and you do stuff. And like you said, police officers, well, 30 minutes, or not, about an hour ago now, had a cop behind me and I'm like, fuck, am I about to get pulled over? Because I like because I got from one lane to another to dodge a bus that pulled over, and then this cop got behind me and followed me for a little bit. I'm like, damn it, man, don't tell me I'm about to get pulled over. I did not get pulled over, thankfully. But
how many times
they
have you
see
been driving
people
down the road and you see a cop has somebody pulled over and you slow down because the fear of is like that guy's going to shoot out behind you somehow and pull you over because you're going 5 miles an hour faster. He's already
I don't get why people do that.
But it's the thing. It's what, you know, it's just what law enforcement brings. I mean, because we're an enforcement arm of the law. You know, we're the teeth behind any laws, and there's no way to make that palatable for people. It's just it is what it is. You know, like you can't make it different than it is. We can. I mean, I came up in my career with the whole community-oriented policing was just coming on board, and that culture shift of being more involved in the community, calling them customers, things like that. And I don't have any problem with any of that. That's all super necessary stuff to be more connected to your community. But what it digressed into, or what it really disintegrated into, was everybody gets to tell you how to do your job. And I don't really know too many other careers where that happens. You know, you don't call up Jeff Bezos at Amazon and be like, hey, I know how to do your job better than you do. We're subject matter experts in it. And to touch on what you said with people that are within our profession that are violating the law, there's nobody harder on it. I'll point out right now, I just watched the video. It's floating around on Instagram and on YouTube of a police officer in Arizona. I think he works for Albuquerque PD. He gets arrested on duty for a domestic violence incident, alleged, obviously. But if you read the comments, it's pretty clear why they came in. They had a warrant for his arrest. So it's a neighboring agency that is doing the arrest. It's where the crime happened. Domestic violence it's either his wife or his girlfriend. Really severe, it sounded like, based on the description. They come serve a warrant on him in briefing. He's in full uniform. They hook him up. They actually cut his uniform off him. And I can tell you.
Oh, no way.
Oh, yeah. They took his duty belt off, handcuffed him, cut his uniform off before they walked him out of the station. And if you look on the faces of all those detectives and his peers that are sitting there in roll call, they're all more serious about it than any citizen will ever be, because that's the ultimate transgression. We are gifted with the ability to use force on another human being, take a life if necessary, within the confines of a law. And with that comes a serious ethical duty to be really serious about that. And when you violate the law as an officer, I personally can tell you I've had coworkers arrested. I've had friends arrested for doing extremely dumb shit. And there is nobody harder on them than other law enforcement. We don't tolerate it as much as everybody wants to say that there's a thin blue line and we protect each other. We don't when it comes to actual law violations. And I can't speak every agency, every person across the country. Sure, there's some good old boy networks that are out there doing some heinous shit, but that's not law enforcement as a whole. That's
that's not the norm.
People doing bad things and they're exploiting their position. So
people fail to realize that, like I said before, that people in the military and people in law enforcement, stuff like that, are human beings. There are rapists that are in the Marine Corps. There are rapists that are in the Army. There are, rapists in the real world. Just like there are suicides in the military, there's going to be suicides in the real world. People are real people. Like, boot camp doesn't magically change somebody into somebody else. Just like I assume you would say the same thing about police academy. You don't walk away from that being someone else. Some people do. Some people do go to boot camp and it's a complete transformation. They completely turn their life around and stuff like that. And that's awesome. And that's great. Some guys I'm completely transformed. And they go home for 10 days of boot camp leave, because that's what you get at the end of 3 months of boot camp. You go home for 10 days. You come home for 10 days and then you start hanging out with the same people, and dudes get back into drugs and get back into stuff like that. There's gang members in the military. We just had Marines get arrested for 20-something Marines get arrested for human smuggling, trying to be part of this human smuggling ring down here. And people look at that and they're like, can you believe it? Like, that's a black eye on the entire Marine Corps, although 99% of the Marine, I'll say 90% of the Marine Corps is doing what they're supposed to be doing, not breaking any laws, and upholding the standards and the values that are supposed to be instilled in you. So for me, I guess I wish the general public would just realize that we're all human. Things are going to happen. There's no difference between us and the regular people, other than we've had a little bit of training. We can kind of see stuff a little bit differently. Like we can see when one of our friends or something might be slipping, it becomes easier to identify. You're like, okay, dude, what's up?
Right.
But, oh, man.
But when you work for Oracle and Marty in accounting goes and beats his wife up, everybody's like, oh, yeah, that's terrible. But, when this officer beats his wife up or girlfriend, suddenly it's...
If you even hear about it. Because of that, it's not... If a cop gets arrested, it's public information. That's going on the news.
Right.
Like you said, Marty... Marty beats his wife. He's not doing it.
It's their body camera. They released it themselves. It's one of the officers' present's body camera in the briefing when it happened. And the arrest was a day or two prior to this. So in today's age, law enforcement is trending more towards a transparent thing on stuff like that of like, hey, we had a turd in our midst and we took care of it. We want you to know that. But you're damn right that Oracle wouldn't be releasing that guy was arrested for doing that. If he even lost his job, he might not. And in law enforcement, you're done, man. And so it's a small percentage of people that they make. It's a bigger story. If a cop does something like that, it's a giant story. They want to sensationalize stuff like that. And, good people do stupid stuff. Not that that's not this situation. But people make mistakes, and then a lot of times they're mistakes of the heart, and they had the best intentions and they do stuff. But I can tell you from being in law enforcement, especially in today's legal age of everything, every day you're subjected to the confines of the law, and they're so tough to navigate. You're hoping that you do the best in every situation, and you're trying to do the best. We here in California also are kind of naive to the fact that we're the standard for law enforcement nationwide. There's only about 2 or 3 states that have a reciprocal agreement with us, where if you go to an academy in another state, California won't accept you as a peace officer. You have to go through the academy all over again because our standards are so high. We won't accept somebody from out of state. I think it's Oregon, Washington, and Arizona, maybe Nevada, are the only ones we have a reciprocal where you can bounce over and do that. Whereas our standards are applicable pretty much nationwide. And, somewhere in some small agencies and stuff, I actually have a friend. He's a former Marine. He's up in Idaho right now. He's a working police officer every day, and he still hasn't gone through an academy yet, and won't until he becomes full-time and after, a year or two. And in 2020, that's insane to me, but still, I mean, he's carrying a gun and he's enforcing the same laws that we all are, and with very, very little training. And you have to remember that. Yeah, it's crazy. And you have to remember.
What would happen if someone like that? What would happen if someone like that got into a shooting incident? Like that would obviously come up. Like, why is this guy even carrying a weapon?
Because
although he is a Marine, or he was, he is a Marine, so he does know how to handle a weapon, or he should. Sure. I will say, being around Marines, there's a lot of Marines that don't know how to handle weapons. I've been on many ranges where I'm like, watch that dude, because he might shoot somebody in the foot or something.
And there's people where we all take a step back and go, okay, you do what you got to do out front there.
Exactly.
But, so he'd get hung out to dry. Really, honestly, he's carrying it within the scope of what his authority is in that state and what they allow. I'm not here to second guess how they're doing that or why they're doing that. It's a very small agency. They have a couple people there, and they're filling a need, and they're filling it within their legalities. But his worst day at work is still like my worst day at work, and that's the inherent problem that I have is that this stuff that we're out there doing is not to be taken lightly. We are knowingly violating people's rights. And before anybody comes unglued when I say that, we're not doing it cavalierly. But when I arrest somebody, I have just violated your Fourth Amendment rights to unlawful search and seizure and detainer. I have the legal right to do that. And so when I exercise those rights, I am violating yours, and I have to know what I'm doing to do that. You can't be cavalier about this. If you're going to uphold the Constitution and take this seriously, you have to know what you're doing. And unfortunately, when folks are ill trained, that's where we see a lot of those videos out there on the internet are from agencies around the country that have not the same amount of training standards that we have. And so we're judging those people to a very harsh standard, and they may not even know what they're doing. You know, and then I'm sure we can get into it at some point, just given the political climate these days of officers even wanting to do their job and use force and things like that.
Yeah.
So,
I used, you know, when I was younger, I used to want to be a police officer. I was like, I'm going to get out of the military. I'm going to go be a police officer. I think it'd be cool. Cause I grew up as a kid. My parents were born in the 50s. Right. So we used to watch, what was Andy Griffith when I was a kid. Yeah. You know, that's what I grew up knowing, like Andy Griffith, you know, like the local sheriff. He's just helping people out, taking care of people. And obviously that's not the case in some places and stuff like that. And it's just, lately, man, the political climate is just crazy. You know, every police shooting is politicized. Everything is second guessed. Everything is armchair quarterbacked. And it's what really sucks is when you see guys that are following their police, one, it sucks obviously to see anyone get shot. You don't want that. And I know sometimes it happens and it shouldn't happen, but a lot of times it happens because it should have happened. You know, like you're an officer getting shot at and stuff like that. There's so many videos of officers being killed, you know, online that you can see. It's like, dude, I can't imagine the stress. I feel like it'd be stressful every time I walked up to a car window. Like, okay, here we go. Like, what's about to happen? You know, like because you never know what the fuck you're going to encounter. And I don't know. It's just that's a crazy world, man. I'm rambling right now. I'm just kind of rambling right now. I'm kind of like free thinking. My buddy Joel Flores is a police officer as well. He got out of the Marines. He's a police officer. He's on a couple of the episodes. Cool. He's finishing up his officer training right now. Like he's on the streets, but he's like I think he might actually be done with it now. But he might be on his own now.
Field training right now.
Yeah, he's about to finish up his field training if he hasn't already. And I was talking to him the other day, and he had mentioned how they had to go to a house. They got to call a welfare check to go to a guy's house because his buddy hadn't heard from him in a while, and I guess he was like a known alcoholic and stuff like that. And I guess they go to the house, and he kind of like looked in the window, and he could see this dude laid out on the floor and thought he was dead. But then he was thinking like they had to think about if they could go in because he was like talking. He's like, dude, I don't know if I'm going to violate their Fourth Amendments because he could have just been sleeping, and now if we like kick the door in and go in and try to save this dude that we think might be dead, now we're getting sued as a department because of whatever. So it's interesting that you bring that up. And
further, they kick the door in thinking they're doing good, and that guy's sound asleep on his floor, and here's his front door get booted in and starts shooting at them because he thinks he's getting a home invasion. And then what? You know, those are
you can see the side. You can see both sides.
You gotta really think that stuff through.
Yeah, well, it ended up the dude was passed out. He was on the verge of being dead. I guess this guy was drinking like a liter of vodka a day or something like that. They said he was like, yellow skin. You know, his liver was shutting down basically. Like they probably found him within hours of him. Probably would have died if he hadn't gotten hospital care. And then he was telling me, he was like, yeah, man, I've already encountered 2 dead bodies today, and this doesn't have to do with the coronavirus or whatever. And I'm like, dude, you live in a completely different world than I do, man. I'm like,
where is he working? What agency?
He's in Colorado.
Okay.
He's in Colorado.
Like a big
I'd have to look up
like a Denver size or smaller.
No, it's a small. He worked for the Denver Sheriff's Department for a little bit. He was in the jails, and he was just like, dude, fuck this. He thought it was a toxic environment. He said it was he talks about it on his other podcast. He's like, it's a toxic environment. They weren't running it right. People were overworked. Like, it just wasn't what he wanted to do. So he left and got into contracting for communication. But then he was like, I want to be a police officer. So he came back, you know, and now he's like a city cop somewhere in Colorado. But I'm like, dude, you live in a completely different world, man. I'm like, normal people can't, and like we have already kind of touched on, like your interactions with people every day, a lot of times it's like the worst day of their life or one of the worst days of their life, and that's like almost every interaction I imagine that you come into.
Yeah, and one of the things too, you know, that I got asked a lot was, why are cops such assholes, you know? And I was always like, oh, hey, you're not wrong, I guess, in some fashion. But we do have that demeanor about us. And here's the best that I can answer that for two reasons. Number one, the stuff we see and what we're subjected to wears you out. As a, you're not programmed, you're not equipped to see that level of violence, pain, suffering, and things like that. And you learn really quickly to shut those emotions off. You have to survive, to get through another day and to go back to work. And so you become very adept at being emotionally shut off, which then doesn't just shut off when you go home. It's not a Mr. Rogers sweater that I change when I come home and put one off and put my jacket in the closet and put the I'm dad and husband on when I come home. That stuff that you can't shed that. And so to protect yourself from everything that goes on, you have to develop that. Secondly, when you're out there, unfortunately, we deal with less than 2% of the population, and it is the worst 2% of the population. Whether it's the smallest jurisdiction or LA, LA just has a higher volume of it. Their calls for service it's insane. It's a war zone. I have good friends that work down there. I've spent a lot of time, hundreds of hours flying with their unit for training, and I'm shocked at how busy it is. And when I say busy, I'm not saying like barking dog complaints. I'm talking about like stuff that we would send our whole shift to, and they have it pending because they don't have anybody to go to it. And so what does
that mean? You send your whole shift to? How many people would that be?
So
what would that entail?
For my last agency, I worked graveyards, and for the half of the county that I worked in, and we call it the lower half, there was our minimum staffing was 5, and there might be 6, maybe 7 with the sergeant on duty. And if one of those type incidents, everybody would go to it. It's a shooting in progress or stabbing or stuff like that. A lot of people would go to it. And in LA, it's like they're just voicing it over the radio just because it's happening, and there's nobody going because they're all busy on other stuff. And I'm sitting in the helicopter.
How big is LA's police force? Do you know?
Oh God, about 10,000 officers. It's somewhere
10,000 officers.
Yeah, about 9,000 to 10,000 officers, I think.
So millions of people, though.
Yeah. So and I may get this wrong. Anybody from LAPD, don't crucify me. I'm just going off memory. I believe they have 19 or 22 precincts, and each precinct there is about the size of a very large agency. So up here we have Sacramento Police Department and Sacramento County Sheriff. It's our biggest agencies nearby. Sacramento Police Department probably has around 800 or 900 officers, I think, off the top of my head. And one of those precincts in LA has about the same. And they have, like I said, 19 or 22, somewhere in there, precincts. And each one of those precincts, they actually they tracked murder statistics. The year I was down there riding with a guy on the street, his precinct is the 77th Division, which it's 4 square miles. It's where Florence and Normandy was, where Reginald Denny was pulled out of his truck during the Rodney King riots and beaten in that intersection. That's the 77th Division. So you can imagine what it's like down there, what the demographic, what the populace is like, and what the call volume is like for that 4 square miles. From what I remember, they had the most homicides in all of LA, and they beat the next division out by like 3. And I think it was like 117 for the year. So if you go then the next
117 homicides in 4 square miles,
one precinct, and so then you go. So Oakland up here is a giant, I'm trying to think of a PC word. Hey, you wouldn't want to live there in Oakland. It's turning around. They're doing their best. Stockton, same thing. So during that same time, I actually was in a training class with a guy. He was working for Oakland PD, and his brother he had a 77th Division jacket on. I was like, hey, cool jacket. And he goes, yeah. My brother works down there, and he was telling me the homicide rate in Oakland was really high, and it was like 40 or something like that. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's on a level that you can't fathom. So not only are you dealing with that, but then when you deal with the regular populace, you're not dealing with everybody. I mean, with community policing, it helps because it gets us out there involved in the community, and we do deal with some regular folks. But the example I always give is standing on a traffic accident. And this is an actual story that actually really happened. We're standing there. There's a fatal accident down the road. there's actually a body laying in the middle of the road with the yellow tarp over it. And we have fire trucks lined up. We have police cars lined up. There's flare patterns. Like, you can clearly see where you should and shouldn't drive. And I'm standing there like directing traffic, and car after car after car after car drives. They're all looking, but they're going where they're told, like, go that way. And one car comes down, drives over about 4 flares, goes around the back of my patrol car, in between the next patrol car, and starts going up next to the fire engines. And I'm like, whoa, what? I go running over there, do the official police halt. What, what you want to say is, what the fuck are you doing? But being not on duty, I kindly say, what are you doing? Oh, I need to go that way. Okay, well, you can't because the road's shut down. And they're like, yeah, but I live down there. Okay, but you can't go there. Well,
yeah, go the other way.
You like, well, I don't care. I need to go down there. So out of 100+ cars that had passed that I just gave a nod and a hand wave to, this person does that. So then in time, you develop the attitude that everybody is assholes and they're all fucking stupid. And, it's not the case. It's just, that is who we deal with. That is the one person on that incident that I had to interact with. And it really colors you towards the way the world is. Not to mention, like you said, you're suspicious of everybody. Everybody lies to you, the people that we're dealing with. Everybody lies to you. Everybody has the potential to harm you. Walking up to a car, we don't know if it's my grandma or, some guy that is wanted for murder. And that really, really sinks in. I mean, 10, 15, 30 years of doing that, it just wears on you. You can't help it. And so it does change you as who you are. I'm not the same person today as I was when I graduated the academy. And
how do they try to prepare you? How do they try to prepare you in the academy for that? Like, how, what kind of lessons did you learn in the police academy that you carried on throughout your entire career?
I would say probably they're trying to do a better job about talking about, being open about talking. Law enforcement years ago was a very close-knit society. A lot of people did what's called choir practice, and I think a lot of people probably still do. They'd meet after their shift, probably drink heavily, and then that's how you decompress. That's how you got away from it all. And it was super unhealthy. So they're when I was becoming involved in law enforcement, they were trying to change that. They were really trying to get people to be more healthy in how they did that. They're improving the stigma about talking about how you feel, what you, trying to get you counseling when needed. The first agency I worked for was pretty progressive. We actually had I'll call her a psychologist. I don't know what her official, but she was a therapist, and she worked for us. She was part of our community resources as well. She did a lot with troubled youth and stuff, but she was available to us. We could actually walk into her office and talk to her. And I know LAPD has probably several on their staff like that. So agencies are starting to be a little more proactive about that. The bigger, more progressive agencies are getting better at doing critical incident debriefs. If something big happens, and that's kind of subject to what the agency feels is big. It could be somebody like your friend who witnesses his first suicide, whether you witness it in person or come on right after. That's pretty traumatic to realize that this person took their own life. And so depending on how that person's reaction is, they might try to do a critical incident debrief. It's a team of people that are trained to talk through some stuff and get you doing different stuff. So they're trying to be proactive about that, trying to be, there's a lot of folks out there. Dr. Kevin Gilmartin has wrote a book on called Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. And it really talks about the cycles of what you go through on your time off and how you change. And honestly, in my opinion, it should be required reading for anybody in the academy. Like, they should issue it to you. If not, if that didn't happen there, when you go to FTO, I think too, in my opinion, having gone the route that I've gone and where I am, sometimes a little salty on stuff, I really feel like they should have people like me that come back in and talk to academy classes and tell them, like, you guys are are writing a check right now that you don't know what the cost is going to be. And you're doing it willingly because the thought of carrying a gun and driving with the lights and sirens on and being kick ass and wearing wearing a badge and all that stuff. It's awesome. And I'm not downplaying that at all. It is the best job that you could ever hope to have, in my opinion. But you're going to pay a price and you don't know what that cost is until you're done. And for some people, it might not, law enforcement will take its toll on you no matter what you do. But for some people, their career could be, we'll call it unremarkable. They get through it without too much fanfare, maybe not any like massive fights, nothing, super egregious, no shootings, no anything like that. If you work in a small agency, maybe you got through there with a minimal toll on you. But if you work for a bigger agency and you have a higher call volume, you're just going to be exposed to more stuff. And the frequency, it's getting harder and harder and harder. As you pointed out before, we all have that Andy Griffith mindset of the little Mayberry. He didn't even carry a gun in it, and the joke was, Barney always had his gun, but he never had a bullet in it, and
he had one bullet in his pocket.
Yeah. He had to take his bullet out because big stuff was happening. And don't we all wish that was the case now? And now it's just, I think it's busier on a level that we've never experienced in history. There's the technology component of it. We know what's pending all the time. We see it on our computers. You have an influx of everything coming at you anyways, and the call volume is going up. And, I think every generation says, oh, well, back in my day. But really, honestly, I think right now you're looking at a career that is going to saturate people just from the job itself. And then you add that political component we talk about, where the thought of most people don't have my back, which is really not true. I don't believe. I believe the general populace really does have law enforcement's back, but they're not expressing it. The vocal people out there make you feel as though you're doing wrong. You're killing people indiscriminately. So that wears on you as feeling as though, the whole world's against me. And then quite frankly, the administrations out there, they're changing. They're turning into politicians. And then you also, so that's a huge issue in and of itself there. And then add the component of everybody's pensions and stuff are under attack. In California, we had really good retirements. It was 3% at 50 for me. That's when I got hired. And then, when we became public enemy number one, everybody was like, well, you guys shouldn't have as good a retirements. Well, historically, we've taken lower pay, so we had better retirements because that's what mattered. Never mind the fact that our average lifespan is about 8 years after retirement, so it's not like I'm collecting 40 years. They start rating that stuff. So I had 3% at 50, which means at 50 years old, if I had started when I was 20, I would be fully vested at 50. I started when I was 22, so I could retire at 52, fully vested with 90% of my income as retirement. That has changed now. In most places, it's 2.75. Some places are even 2.5. They're putting it up at about 55 years old to 57 years old. And to be honest, I don't really want a 57-year-old cop out there for the most part. Trying to chase people through backyards and stuff. So you change all of that stuff and you make it less appealing for people to get into this career. And you're going to see a change in that stuff. So and then if we do a better job in the academy of teaching people what this job is really like, that people are in the academy and go, what the hell am I want this job for? I mean, the retirements are worse. The pay is terrible in parts of the country. And now you're coming in and doing a good job and telling me that I'm going to lose my mind during this. I'm going to work for Oracle. They hire well.
That's how a lot of guys feel about the military too. The retirement benefits are become like a joke. It's like, okay, so I get 50% of my base pay at 20 years. So if I do 20 years, I can get 50% of my base pay. And then I get medical insurance, or I get, lifetime medical through TRICARE, which is better than the general public, but they keep raising like the co-pays on them and stuff like that. So now they're paying more. They're slowly paying more and more. And now like the other benefits that retirees like had, like going to the commissary, going to the PX, these base privileges, now they're saying, hey, we're going to give that to every veteran. So it's like, why would I stay in this job for 20 years? So if I would have joined, I joined when I was 22, so I could have retired at 42. How am I going to step out of a combat arms job with no real world experience at 42, being a retiree, and then like try to go into a whole new field,
Yeah.
it just wouldn't work. And the only thing that's why you see a lot of these guys get out and they stay contracting. They become contractors or they work for the government in another capacity and stuff like that. And I just didn't see it being worth it. I was tired of working under the man, like it was 12 years of federal service was cool, but it was enough for me.
We also realize you're part of the machine, that is part of being in government. And I had the good fortune or ill fortune, however you look at it, of being involved in our helicopter acquisition project. And I saw how absolutely fucked up local government is. And I can only extrapolate that to the federal government and bigger. It's some of the most inefficient stuff you'll ever see in your life.
Oh, for sure.
And you realize that you're a cog in the wheel. And then add to that, to touch on, you said your friend did some time in the jail there on the right side of the bars. I did too. I ended up doing 3 years in our jail after I came back out of patrol, out of air support. They said I owed a year. Through some false advertising, they told me after the fact that I owed a year since I had gotten hired. And I ended up doing 2 more because the schedule was great. And kind of want to be on parity with everybody else in the department that had done their 3, even though we got hired under a time when they were waiving jail time for laterals to entice people to come over back in 2006. And so I did that time in there. And you want to talk about just a microcosm of absolute inefficiency, drudgery, people that don't care anything about their job because they don't value themselves. They don't think. We had correctional officers and then sworn deputies. So as a correctional officer, you're not sworn. You don't have peace officer powers. You are just a correctional officer. And as a new deputy, you have to do 3 years in the jail. If you're new hired right out of the academy, you go straight in there basically after you do some field training, and then you do your 3 years in the jail. And then when you promote to sergeant as a deputy, you would have to go back in the jail and I think do 2 years, but I think you owed a year minimum. And so everybody there on the deputy side and sergeant side, they don't want to be in there. You're made to go in there. Nobody gets hired and goes to the academy and goes, oh man, I can't wait to go sit in a building and breathe sticky inmate air for 12 hours a day. That's not what you want to do in law enforcement, but you're forced to. Now, and I will say it is a massively good training environment. There's things that you learn in the jail that I think every patrol officer needs to know. So if you use it to your advantage, it is a great training environment. However, the job is extremely monotonous. And then being around correctional officers who, unfortunately, a lot of them failed as a deputy, and then they were offered jobs as a correctional officer. And so there's a little bit of a stigma with that, and there's a little bit of a resentment that comes from that. And deputies don't do a good job, like placating them and making them feel like it. It's just a really, really, really tough environment to go in there and thrive. And so you see really what just a stagnant environment causes. And I don't blame you.
What do you say to the people that think that the U.S. is over-policed and because we have a massive incarcerated population and stuff like that. Yeah. And you have these people, and I would have to see evidence. I haven't looked into it, but it feels like a conspiracy theory to me. But you have these people that talk about for-profit prisons and stuff like that, and how they maintain like certain arrest quotas to ensure that these prisons are, they have a certain amount of people in them, so they're generating profit or something like that. You may know more about it than I do. I don't really know too much about it, but I'd be interested to what your thoughts on that are.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I got a check directly back from those companies every time I arrested somebody. So,
I mean, it's for the corporations and stuff.
Yeah, it's I'm not a huge conspiracy theorist. I always like to look at the bigger picture and go like, how plausible is something like that? There are things out there that I think are more plausible than not. But honestly, having a for-profit prison, and what we're talking about are for-profit prisons that are being administered for the state by private companies. And frankly, if we're all being honest with ourselves, they're doing a better job at it because it's a for-profit business. It's like saying,
I was going to say, I bet they're probably nicer than the ones that are run by the state.
Yeah, they have to uphold the same standards as any prison does. There's honestly standards that come down to what the calories are in their food and everything. So it's not like they're gulags out there and then the state ones are super nice. They're probably nicer. They're probably more efficiently run because they're a private business. They have to make money at the end of the day. And so it's the same veins as like if you turn the TSA over to a private organization, it'd be 100 times more efficient than right now. So that's number one. Number two, you'd have to go like, if those are being done for profit, and you have to understand the way that the actual prison system works. And I'll just talk about California because it's obviously what I know. The state prison system does not have anything to do with us other than our inmates at the county level go there when they're sentenced. So if you commit a crime in California that is egregious enough that you get state prison time, when your case is done, you get sent to state prison. You're no longer us. So we would get no money as a county for them. They're not housing them on our behalf. They're not. There's no incentive to do that. And then on top of it, us as patrol officers, why would we be arresting people out there to go like, hey, if I arrest you today on this minor charge or trumped up charge or whatever, why would I do that? And then the district attorney would have to prosecute you. And then you would have to be convicted, and then you would have to go do your prison time for anybody to profit off that. So it's not like I arrest you and you get sent right into that prison. So the local law enforcement, and then to even throw one more monkey wrench in there, there's city police and there's sheriff's offices. It's the office of the sheriff. It's an elected position, and city police departments are incorporated cities. They've formed their own police department. The chief is a hired official by the city manager and city council. And so city police do not do their own custody. If anything, a city police station might have a very temporary holding facility where you're there for a minimum, like I think the maximum is 24 hours. They can even hold you there. So they might have a small couple holding cells to decide if they're going to just kick you out on your warrant, cite and release you, or you're going to be transported to county jail. Most city agencies drive you straight to the county jail. They don't have any facility to hold you. So the city police departments could have no hand in that anyways. And then the county agencies, they're the ones that are in charge of custody. They, by California law, they're the ones that run the jails. And that's one of the sheriff's jobs is to do custody. So those people are there while they're either waiting to bail. If it's a no bail situation or they can't make bail, then they're in custody until they have all of their different hearings, whether they're going to stay in jail during their court process, all that stuff. That's when you're there. And then thanks to laws like AB 109 and stuff, a lot of what would have been state prison time got rolled back to the county level. As I remember it, back when I started, if you had more than a year to do, you would go to state prison. You could do a year or less in county jail. And AB 109 changed a lot of those things and put people that should have gone to state prison, they now stay and serve their time in county jail. Sometimes upwards of 10, 15. I've heard a story of somebody in LA was going to serve 20 years at the county jail. But still, that has nothing to do with
20 years at the county jail.
Yeah,
County
jails are not set up for long-term incarceration like that. They're just not. So
that's crazy.
It's that law changed a lot of stuff and put a lot more seasoned criminals back into county jails where they're teaching low-level inmates, first, second, third time inmates how to be real like
a professional criminal.
Yeah, how to be a professional inmate. And some of it's good. I see there's a lot of positives and people that know how to be inmates. They're very respectful of rules and law because they don't want you messing with them. They know that if they work with you, you work with them. If you're smart as a deputy, a jail deputy. But it's a very complex system. So to just simply say that for-profit jails are out there causing people to be arrested frequently, it's really just kind of nonsense.
No, and I don't want to put it out there like I'm a believer. Like, what the hell?
Yeah. No.
The question I have for people like that is normally like, who do you want to let out of jail? Like who's being over arrested that you think should be let out of jail? I can agree with people saying like people that have like marijuana convictions and stuff like that are in jail, but those people that have like marijuana convictions aren't in prison for multiple years unless they were like trafficking or something like that. That's completely different than your dude that's like buying a dime bag off somebody. Yeah. So I'm like, who is it that has committed a crime that you are okay with them releasing? Because right now they're releasing people out of jails because of this whole coronavirus. They're like, hey, we're releasing people early because the the infection rates and stuff are obviously really bad. I think there was multiple inmates at a Louisiana prison that have already died. Like I think 6 died yesterday or something like that.
It's a very unhealthy population, unfortunately. Just, the inmate population is unhealthy on their best day. As a general rule, they're, and I don't want to classify every inmate this way, but it's just my experience in working around a large inmate population. They're in poor health, and so when I was in there, just the flu would run through. Just certain times of year, everybody was sick, so
it's just being on top. It's just being on top of each other. That's just one of those things where you're on top. I mean, it's like that when platoons go to boot camp and you have 70 to 100 guys in a squad bay living together, sickness goes through it just like that. It just runs rampant through it. They give you some kind of shot at the very beginning of boot camp that's supposed to help. It's like they call it the peanut butter shot because apparently it feels like peanut butter being shot into your ass, like your ass cheek, because that's where they give it. It's like a real thick one. I don't know. Yeah. My platoon, they were out of them, so my platoon didn't have to do it. So for all those listening out there, I didn't have to do it, and they're all probably pissed because their DIs will make them do it. Then they sit on their ass and rock back and forth on it to make it hurt more. So just to circle back real quick for the people that don't know what AB 109 is, do you want to explain what that is and what it fully did with the system here in California?
Yeah. So what it did was I'm trying to remember because it's been a while since it's been instituted. It reclassified some of the laws as far as what was felonies, what wasn't, what constituted a felony, dollar amounts on theft, things like that. And then really what it did was as I recall, they're trying to lower the state prison population. And so what you're doing in essence is you're juggling one population for another. So you're saying that this crime that used to get you state prison time now doesn't. You're still in county jail, so you're just in one building or another. But it makes it look like the state cares more about like rehabilitation and things like that. From what I gather, like I said, it's been a long time. I know what it did for us is it put a population into our jail that we now were responsible for a much longer time period than they would have been. Normally inmates that are there for serious state prison offenses, when they're done with their court case, they will go to state prison. And now as part of that sentence, depending on what you were convicted of and what the time penalties were, you would serve that sentence in county jail, and it also depending on the severity of you as an inmate. So now you have a population of inmates that are much more sophisticated than everybody has this notion of like, if you get a DUI, you're going to prison. Well, no, you go to county jail and you will unless you kill somebody. And really, honestly, even if you kill somebody, you wouldn't probably end up doing state prison time. You would do local county jail time for whatever it was, and you're done. And so if you picture what county jail inmates are supposed to be, they're people that are serving their, first couple times in jail. And so now you have this class of inmates that is back spending time in our jail, like lots of time in our jail. And so we had to have a special section that was just for them because they're way more sophisticated than regular inmates. And well, not to go super far down a rabbit hole, but there's prison politics there that they have to abide by. There's things that have to happen if you're white, black, Hispanic. If you don't do certain things, if you bunk as a prison inmate in county jail, if you bunk with other races, they'll fuck you up. Like you'll get your ass kicked for doing it. They can't do it. Oh, really? Oh yeah. There's rules, and you don't have to be part of a gang or anything like that. There's just rules that you follow when you are an actual prison inmate. When you've been to prison and you're going to probably go back there, you don't mess around with that stuff. Anybody that has any kind of sex related offensive, especially child related offensive, they'll get their ass handed to them, if not straight up killed. Our jail wasn't that violent, but bigger jails, like it's take that guy out, or rival gang members. In the bigger jails, they have to segregate walking down the hall, they can't even walk down the hall pass. If you know that other person's a rival gang member and you have an opportunity, you were supposed to fight them. So,
oh really?
Oh yeah. Man. And if your own gang finds out you didn't take that opportunity, they kick your ass. So you have to be extremely careful when you're dealing with that level of inmate. And so now you have a whole jail full of people that are there for minor to moderate to maybe major offenses, but it's their first offense. They've never been anywhere, but they did something really heinous and they don't know anything about this world. And then you have this whole population over here that really does, and they have some rules and codes that they live by. And that it just is. You can not like it. You can say that's wrong. You can say, hey, this is 2020 and we're all supposed to get along and race isn't supposed to be a thing, but they all live by it. It's not like the white ones are doing this. It's the blacks have the same rules and the Hispanics have the same rules as the whites, and they don't violate them either. And so when you have that prison inmate population there, and now you have them for a very long time and they're serving their sentences there, that's different. And frankly, if I'm being honest, most of those inmates really didn't like the law either, because they have a lot more freedoms in state prison than they do here. They have their own TVs in their cells. They have a lot more stuff available to them. So most of these guys didn't want to serve their sentence in county jail anyways, but they didn't meet that. They weren't bad enough inmates to have to go back to state prison, and maybe the crime they committed wasn't quite egregious enough. So it was a really, really dicey situation.
What a weird world, man. It's like, how do you expect to get out of jail if you're following rules where you're supposed to fight people? It's like, dude, you're never going to get out. Like, because I feel like that just adds time onto your sentence, right? Like, if you every time you violate something, doesn't that just add more time to your sentence? So it's like, man. What percentage of people? Do you know what percentage of people you dealt with that were like that had been in jail prior? Is it pretty high? Is the
I hate to throw a percentage out there, but it's high. Most people in jail have been there more than once.
Yeah, man. Well, let's shift gears. Let's go over so let's talk about the actual police department that you work for, or you can talk in generalities if you want. What are the different roles that police officers can fill, like the different billets? Like you said, you worked with like an air patrol and stuff like that. So you obviously have your patrol officer. Like, what kind of jobs do they do? What's like the day-to-day interactions, and then what's like the next levels up to the different kind of jobs that you guys have?
Yeah. So for a police department or a sheriff's office, I'll talk a little bit about each one of those, and then where those two agencies could have different roles, because a sheriff's office has some other things attached to it that police departments wouldn't. Just entry level basic stuff for a police agency is your patrol officer. You come out of the academy. Now, whether that agency sends you to the academy or you put yourself through the academy and they get hired by someone, kind of depends on the size of the agency. Bigger agencies either have their own academies or they will sponsor people. You get hired and then put through a local academy, and you wear their uniform, the agency's uniform while you're there. So when you come out, you're just assigned a patrol, and like your friend going through field training. It's FTO. It's called Field Training Program. You go through, these days it's probably going to be about 16 weeks. I think, 12 to 16 weeks is reasonable. It could be upwards of 20 weeks, I think. But, those are the standards basically for coming out. And there's a couple phases to it. First phase, you're just learning. You don't do much driving. You're just basically there trying to figure out what the hell is going on, because the academy teaches you the basics, but it doesn't put it all together. Like, the toughest scenario in the academy is nothing like a real life call. So they're basically easing you into this, and then phase 2, you have more responsibilities, more driving. Phase 3, you're pretty much on your own. And I'm pretty sure that's probably it. There might be a phase 4 for some agencies, and then you're out on your own, and then you're on probation for a period of time. Some are a year total from hiring, some are 18 months. And so as a probationary employee, you're at will. So they can basically call you in and go, hey, you suck, you got to go. So you got to be really careful during that time so you don't step on it and get fired. And then after you pass your probationary period, now you're just a patrol person. So depending on the agency, there's a couple of different levels. Some agencies have what's called a corporal. So then the next step would probably be like an FTO officer, meaning I've been an officer long enough now, typically minimum of 3 years, more preferably about 5 years or more. I've been an officer long enough to now I can take trainees. And so when a trainee comes, I'll get assigned to them. I do daily evals on them. I'm the person that's training them to be a peace officer and not kill themselves or others. And if they're not performing to standards, we have some remedial stuff. We have to document why that's happening, and then basically decide whether they need to be kept as an officer or not. And a lot of people can make it through the police academy because they're smart. It's really in the grand scheme of things, not that hard. And then they get out into the real world and they can't put it all together. That the common sense doesn't get them. They just under stress, the real stress of responding to a call and trying to figure out even how to get there. They just fall apart and they can't perform under that. And so with enough documentation, they're no longer police officers or deputy sheriffs. So they would fail field training. And as a police department, you probably would be gone. There's not too many places to put you in the department once you failed that. So you're just, see ya, go be a bank
thanks for coming.
Or something. Yeah. Not the career for you. So, so that's field training officer. Some agencies call that a corporal. Some agencies have a field training officer, and then corporal is kind of your first, maybe like promotional thing. They're kind of a entry level supervisor type thing, but not every agency has corporal. Usually the first leadership role or first promotion that you would get is to sergeant. That's the person that's in charge of the shift. Depending on the size of the agency, there could be one sergeant on duty with their crew, or there could be multiple sergeants on duty in different districts with their own crews. And so you're in charge of briefing. You're the first supervisor, and you're supervising people on your shift for the time that they're on your shift during that shift rotation. And then you write evaluations on them because you're the ones that's out there with them, working alongside of them. They're approving your reports, and they know really intimately what you're doing and if you're performing at the level you should be. Usually past that is a lieutenant. A lot of places call them a watch commander. So there could be multiple lieutenants on at a night. My agency would have one watch commander. If they were even on duty, they were kind of on call past a certain time at night. And they're getting into management at that point. They're in charge of some budgeting stuff. They would be in charge of different special teams which fall underneath their jurisdiction and supervisory role. And then you would typically have a captain after that, kind of a broader scope. They're in charge of multiple lieutenants. They're in charge. We had like a patrol division captain, the admin captain that oversaw records and a whole bunch of other stuff. And then past that, some agencies have what's called a deputy chief, and then obviously the chief past that. Not every agency has a deputy chief. And then some agencies have maybe some different levels in there, but that's pretty much that progression. Same thing on the deputy sheriff side. Really big difference being between sheriffs and police is the sheriff is an elected official. So you have to remember that when you're working for a sheriff, every 4 years, that person is up for election. And if they're good at being sheriff, they also want to be reelected. And so it's a different vibe in an agency like that versus a police department where they're hired and fired by city management. So that's some of those key differences just in the supervisory capacities. The really different job stuff that you can have in law enforcement is similar between those two type of agencies. You have basic patrol, and then usually the first departure from that would be some sort of investigations role, whether you go become a detective. Some agencies are very, very specific about detectives, like LAPD being a detective is like a whole separate career in and of itself. You can go there and do the rest of your career there. It's a promotional thing. There's different ranks within that. Just being a detective for LAPD doesn't mean you're a homicide detective, and like homicide detectives are like really revered there. But for smaller agencies, there can be time limits for being a detective. You could do it for 5 years and then you got to reapply. Pros and cons to that as far as rolling people out with a ton of experience, but they're trying to let people have more opportunities. So within investigations is a whole bunch of other routes. Investigations will typically cover narcotics, auto theft task forces, homicide investigations, property crimes investigations, crimes against persons, sex crimes. Depending on the size of your agency, those are all very specific, like independent agencies within that investigations. Like there's a sex crimes unit just within the agency. Most agencies are going to have you wouldn't have a property crimes detective going and interviewing a sexual assault victim. That the techniques and the everything involved in that are just different. So they're going to separate that to some extent, just depending on how many people you have available to you. Maybe your property crimes guy also does some homicides because you never get homicides. So, so that's kind of the investigation side. Then within that narcotics side, you have like deep narcotic stuff where people are actually undercover, those type of things. You have narcotics task force that could be more like a patrol-based thing, but you're not assigned to patrol. You're out there in full uniform. Maybe you have a dog attached to your unit, and you're out there doing just specific drug task force stuff. But you're not patrol. You're not handling regular patrol calls and stuff. So that's investigations as a whole. And then within investigations, you can also have like, CSI, like all the TV shows. That's not some of the big agencies.
Got to get that DNA, man. Got to find that DNA.
Yeah. And you put it in the computer and 7 seconds later, you got a match. That's like super
exactly.
fast. So CSI a lot of times is a non-sworn thing. It's civilian. I don't want to call them civilians. They work for the agency, but they're non-sworn people that are out there doing that stuff. Some of the bigger agencies, they may have sworn people involved in it. It just depends on how your agency decides to do it. So, and then you have like evidence. That's usually part of CSI. They're the ones that are holding all the evidence, booking all the evidence, processing evidence. That's typically more of a non-sworn function as well. Might be overseen by somebody sworn, just depends. And then you have, what am I forgetting? Then you have like your special team stuff. If that's the investigations route, you can go off on that thing. Police agencies can do special team stuff. So we use LAPD as an example. They have what they're called their Metro Division, which is all their special teams fall under Metro Division. So they have motors as part of Metro. And I'm trying to recite this off memory. I might be wrong, but
what is motors?
Motors is the motorcycle police officers. So
okay.
We'll actually just throw that under traffic because most agencies actually do that under traffic. So they have a traffic division. You can go into traffic. You can start off just driving a patrol car. Like DUI enforcement would typically fall under traffic division. So guys that are out there in the evening hours and their sole purpose is doing DUI enforcement. And that they don't handle calls for service unless it seems to be DUI related. They go to DUI accidents, but their whole job is to be experts in that. They're also usually what's called a DRE, which is a drug recognition expert. So they can determine if you're under the influence of some sort of a substance and maybe that's contributing to your DUI. So that all falls under traffic. And then in some agencies, like if you look at the CHP, their traffic division, well, technically, they're kind of all traffic officers in the CHP, the Highway Patrol. But traffic can also do commercial enforcement. So some of the agencies out there, they have the trucks and they're making sure that big rigs aren't driving off outside of truck routes, or they're doing some sort of big commercial enforcement type stuff. And then the major thing that most people see with traffic is the motorcycle cops, the motor cops. So they're out there on motorcycles. They can be way more maneuverable and get through stuff and go out there because they're not arresting people for the most part. They're out there handling traffic accidents, collision stuff, and then also doing traffic enforcement. That's a major difference. Sheriff's agencies are not actually, from what I remember, they're technically not allowed to do traffic enforcement with motors. If a sheriff's department has a motor unit, they're out either doing other stuff. They're doing like high saturation neighborhood patrol stuff because the motors can get into those areas really, really fast and really nimble, or they're contracted. So some city decides we're an incorporated city, but we don't want to have our own police department. So we're going to contract with the sheriff's office. They're going to provide services. And a lot of times they actually have their own uniform. They have their own cars. And it says, like for us up here, it's the city of Rancho Cordova. It's Rancho Cordova PD. But those are actually Sacramento County Sheriff employees that are working. Oh. It's a contract city. And you guys down in SoCal have lots of contract cities down there. So.
That's pretty interesting. For the motorcycle cops, is that like a pretty revered job? I feel like that would be a super cool job. I see them cruising around. They got their M4s on the back, like mounted on the back and stuff. And I'm like, damn, that looks sick.
Yeah, and if you look at their kick-ass leather boots, those guys are one of my good friends.
Those I do not like.
Officer. He's like, my biggest danger being a motor officer is driving past a bunch of storefronts with really shiny windows because I look over at myself and know I look so goddamn good, I'm gonna rear end somebody because I'm staring at myself. And so those dudes, they take a lot of pride in how they look. Usually they have that really big that traffic presence, and they're out there doing a ton of enforcement on that stuff. They'll go out and saturate areas that they get complaints on for traffic and stuff. So that's usually the traffic division. And then they'll usually have, depending on the size of the agency, like what's called a MATE team, major accident investigation team. And so any fatalities, they'll definitely come out there. So depending on your agency, as a police agency, you're in charge of collisions within your jurisdiction. So smaller agencies, patrol officers handle either non-injury or minor injury stuff. But once it gets into either major injury or fatality, then they'll call out motors because they actually do reconstruction. They do skid speed analysis. They in these days they got lasers and they'll shoot the whole scene and map it all out because you're going to charge somebody with a crime for vehicle code violation. You were driving in such a manner and you could have caused death. And if we're going to charge you with that, then they have to be able to present that case. So they have very specialized people to do that stuff. So, so that's traffic division. And then some places have a mounted division, you know, the guys on horses that do crowd control stuff. A lot of that is kind of PR stuff. It feels good doing parades and fundraising events and stuff. But places like New Orleans, well, hell, even LAPD does a lot of mounted stuff. But places like New Orleans, they use those horses a ton, man. Super crowd control.
To work through those crowds, yeah.
Oh, yeah, man. And there's no better crowd control tool than a horse. You move that giant horse sideways and start smashing people with that thing, and like you move
like
people.
Get out of the way.
Yeah, I got a horse coming through, so you should move. And
plus, you're like 6 feet above everybody, looking down on everything.
Man, you see those people that get snatched up by the back of their shirt and just picked up off the ground and trucked out of there by horse.
Did you see that a couple weeks ago or like a month ago, they arrested some dude, and it was a black dude, and they tied him up. They had him handcuffed, and the horse officer had him walking in front of him. I think he had like a rope tied to his fucking like handcuffs or something and was walking him. And they were like, yeah, that was super bad for their PR right there. That looked really bad.
There's a lot of things you just don't do these days, and walking anybody, but especially as a person of color on a horse rope type arrangement, just real stupid. You know, it's like,
I mean,
how is that for crowd control, using fire hoses? You just don't do that shit anymore. It's like,
well, how's a horse mounted officer supposed to detain someone and like, you know, move them around? You can't throw them on the back of the horse with you.
You get off.
You just wait. Horse, you're supposed to just wait and have somebody else come get them on
your horse. Yeah, I don't know why they did that. You know, it's just real dumb. I think
he might have got fired for that. I think the dude might have gotten fired for that. So
yeah, probably.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's look at some of your special tactics kind of guys. Your guys that do like entries in houses, and I know a lot of jurisdictions. The sheriff's departments are the ones that like do the warrants and stuff like that, serve warrants and stuff like that. But I know also like the police, SWAT teams and stuff will also serve like high risk warrants and stuff like that. So. You want to kind of talk about that side of the house a little bit, just because I know a lot of people are going to be really interested about that, and I know a lot of guys that come out of the military that may want to go in the police force, and that is a step that they would maybe pursue. So, if you could talk about those guys and kind of the qualifications that you have to meet to like move up to that kind of level.
Yeah, you bet. So whatever they're calling them these days, whether it's a SWAT team, a lot of them call them SET team, SEB, Special Equipment Bureau. They have a lot of different acronyms for it, but we'll just call it like SWAT teams, special teams kind of thing. So on the low end of that, if you're in a big enough agency, your investigations unit might have their own, like, it's a SWAT team, but it's not the guys with full body armor and the armored vehicle looking thing. They're just out there serving their own warrants. So they have a shit ton of experience. They have more equipment than a standard patrol officer would be. And they're the ones that are serving lots of felony warrants, drug warrants, things like that. And so they wouldn't necessarily use a SWAT team, the whole SWAT team, for just your daily warrants. And I mean, even a patrol officer can go serve low end warrant stuff. So, but a lot of agencies will have that first level where it's high speed, it's higher speed than patrol, but it's not your actual like fully SWAT team kind of thing. So that you're out there serving warrants. The next level is that special teams thing where you're assigned to it. Again, depending on the size of your agency, my two agencies were not full time. It was a collateral assignment, so they went and trained. However often they did, a couple times a month or once a week, but that was not your full-time duty. It was an ancillary duty. If the SWAT team was activated, you would either get called out from home or you had your stuff in your patrol car and you would respond to the scene or respond back to the equipment locker and get geared up and then all go down as a team kind of thing. So, and then the bigger agencies have full-time SWAT teams, LAPD, LA County, SO, has their SEB, LAPD has their Metro division, and those agencies are so big. Not only are they full time, but they have multiple teams. So like SEB, I think has 3 full teams, and I'm talking like 18 plus people per team, and they have 3 of them. So you're a full team 24 hours a day. It's your rotation, and that's all you do is those agencies. They're probably not just going out and serving regular warrants, but they're doing anything that meets the level of, okay, this is your guys' job. It's anything that's obviously armed or has a history of violence. So once it raises to that level, those guys and gals are going to that. So if that's your full-time job, then you do that as long as you want to stay in it. And it's pretty kick-ass. And some of the, like a mid-level agency, you could be assigned to SWAT full-time, but you're not doing like LA County and LA County Sheriff. You would be out maybe in teams doing directed patrols. Let's say an area is really, really high crime, high gang area. They'll take their SWAT team people because they're out working. They're not working patrol, but they're working directed patrol, and they'll go, we're going to just go hammer that area for a month straight and saturate that with guys that have a little bit more experience and knowledge. And we're going to just take it to that area and see what we can do on it. So that's for agencies that are big enough to have them doing full-time stuff, taking them out of patrol, but they're not big enough to be in LA County where it's like those dudes just go do kick-ass shit every day. I mean, if you follow them, follow LASEB on Instagram, and you get to see how busy those guys are.
I'm gonna have to check that out. I follow a few pages like that, so I don't even know where my phone is.
Follow them. Follow what is it? Air 5, I think it is. It's LA County's air unit. It's their search and rescue air unit. They have 3 giant helicopters, and their SEB people are actually the crew in those. They're paramedics as well, and that's like a super badass job. So to get into any of that stuff, you have to have been in law enforcement for a while. I know a lot of people with military backgrounds and military service would be super drawn to that stuff. And I know a lot of the folks that came in and worked with me when I was in a training environment, they were, man, I'm here because I want to be SWAT. And it's like, slow your roll, son. You got some stuff to learn first. That's down the road for you. It'll be there, but you have to be a really good officer first, because now we're going to put you into way more intense environments. And somebody that's tough for somebody coming from a military background that has probably done some high-speed shit. I mean, you probably had some decent training anyways, depending on your branch of military and your service. You had some basic training, but let's say that you were in a military unit where you got to do some stuff. You know, you're out there maybe in a combat situation, maybe doing it, like you've been there, and then to come into this world and talk to a guy like me that's never served like that. I'm like, hey, that's all great, but we're going to get to that someday. Right now, you're in a new world. And the rules are way different. We don't lay down cover fire, you know, we're accountable for all the rounds. And there's a huge thing that you need to learn. And you got to be really good at this job before we can then go add all of these other pressures onto you as well. Because when you are a SWAT team member, no matter whether it's a small agency or a big agency, when we need you, we need you. Shit's gotten really bad. And the regular patrol officer, it's outside of our realm. We need help. You got to show up and go, I'm here. Same with canine, same with air support. Those are very specialized missions within that, where they're looking to you for help because they're overwhelmed. It's outside of their either personal capabilities, their tactical skills, or even their equipment skills. We may not possess the equipment that the SWAT teams do. So You have to have an experience level that matches that. And for most agencies, it's going to be probably a minimum of 3 years. For somebody like LAPD Metro, you probably have spent 10 years in patrol, and it's not 10 years in patrol being a lop, like hiding from stuff. It's working in the shit, in where people know, like, oh, you willingly went to those precincts where it was daily in the suck, and you in that 10 years, you know what you're doing, and then you can test for that. So that's probably the realistic experience level for big agencies that have a high speed thing like that. And yeah, because I mean, you're what they're asking you to do requires a certain confidence level in your job, and a knowledge of the law to know like what you can do and what you can't do. And so that just takes a little bit of time, whether it's whether your background's in military or not. You know, you got to be really good at the job that you were hired to do before you can go do all these other super kick-ass jobs. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. That's how it is in the military as well. When you're going into like any kind of specialized unit that's going to, like, you know, specialize in direct action and stuff like that, you got to go through a pipeline. Some units require that you're a certain rank, you know, or some units require a certain rank, you know, that way you've gotten that base experience and kind of understand the whole process before you start running into, you know, the higher end stuff, because that should all be second, you know, afterthought. You shouldn't even be thinking about the basic stuff anymore. You're focused on like more technical aspects of your job and stuff. So that makes sense.
yeah.
Now you talked about, and I just want to bring this up real quickly. You talked about how you can't lay down covering fire and stuff like that. and immediately in my head, what popped in my head for whatever reason was there was in Florida, I think there was a shootout. It was like I think someone was kidnapped. They were kidnapped and they were on like a UPS truck.
Oh yeah, the UPS truck. Yeah.
And everyone, and I mean, it's hard for me to argue, but the people I talk to, you know, you see all these cops converging on this one spot, and they're all shooting, but they're all like completely surrounding the vehicle, and they're all shooting into it. What kind of training, like, that can't be like standard procedure right there for everybody, because you're all like shooting at each other basically just from different sides of the vehicle? Or is there something that, and me as a civilian, that I don't understand, that I'm seeing wrong here? Or are you aware of this incident? You know what I'm talking about?
I'm super aware of that one. We actually had one very similar to that down in Stockton a couple years ago. Very similar in nature. It was a bank robbery that got interrupted, and during it, they grabbed, I want to say they pulled one of the tellers out and hijacked her car with her in it, and went on a very high speed chase. And the conclusion, and they were shooting at the officers while driving. And at the conclusion, they just got lit up, and unfortunately, the bank teller was killed in that. And it's a terrible situation. You know, that UPS incident. It's man, just to describe it bluntly, it's just fucked. I mean, like you're just like 8 layers of screwed. These guys are very dangerous. They've I'm trying to remember the specifics, but I think they'd
already been firing. Yeah, they'd already been shooting at officers and stuff like that.
It's not just a robbery that's like, hey, we jumped into the UPS truck and nothing bad has happened here, but I ran up to it and jumped in it, and no display of a weapon and stuff. Like, these are really bad people. It's really dangerous. It's a huge degree of danger to the general populace as they're driving down the road.
For sure.
And that driver in there is an unsuspecting victim in that stuff. Like, yeah, it sucks. And so at the termination of that thing, when those dudes were, the video I've seen, it definitely looks like they were starting to shoot upon as soon as they came to a stop. You know, they're like ready to go. And like, what are you going to do at that point? You're going to just hide behind your cars and say, hey, please don't do that. Wait till they run out of bullets. Are they going to run out and carjack the people that are directly beside them? Given the circumstances, from what I saw, you know, I think those officers did a commendable job. You have to remember, you're all running up from multiple angles of things.
Exactly.
And you're blocked by a UPS truck, and what we're watching is aerial footage of it and going, hey, that dummy's shooting from that side. Well, you don't even know the guy is on the other side. I mean, you could probably assume that, but you don't like, I wouldn't know that. The guys that used the vehicle that was moving for cover themselves.
Cover, yeah.
Like,
that was another big thing that people weren't happy to see. They were like, "Oh, they're fucking using civilians as as
the
cover."
guy's there. I mean, the best thing he is there in his car. That's where it comes to conclusion. I mean, if we could diagram it out and plan it out and go, okay, let's make this safe for when this comes to a conclusion, that would be great. But
heat of the moment.
They stop and it's on. And so you go,
yeah.
Hey, that guy is trapped in his car. What better way to help him than to get up on his car and start like
laying down cover fire?
You're laying hate on that vehicle, going like, the best I can do is do that. Now, is it going to draw some fire to that guy? Maybe, but those criminals in there, they don't care. They're not like aiming and stuff. They're just shooting indiscriminately at that point, and they're going to injure or kill somebody else. So you're
again, I want to say also, I'm not armchair quarterbacking, and I don't want it to seem like that we're trying to armchair quarterback to the people that are watching or listening and stuff like that. It's obviously a crazy job, and that's a heat of the moment kind of situation where you're just kind of reacting to shit. This is how this situation has just developed. Unfortunately, he's stuck in traffic. He has a weapon and a hostage, and now we have to deal with that. How is an incident like that looked at afterwards as in a training perspective? Like I got it. I bet they've watched that video 1,000 times and used it as a training tool and stuff like that. What kind of training stuff are you trying to glean from information like that? And what is like one of the most common things that you see corrected after a situation, like officers, like a common mistake that officers make in a high intensity, shootout kind of situation like that?
Well, to dissect the one that happened out in Stockton near us, it was extremely similar. They hired an independent firm that is comprised of some retired chiefs and stuff, and they did a full analysis of it. I mean, it was like many 100-page reports of it. We actually had a presentation given by one of the people involved in that on the takeaways from that. Because I mean, with every incident, big or small, you learn from it. Take the North Hollywood shootout down in LA. That I was in the academy when that happened, and that's still one of the most talked about incidents out there. Those two bank robbers down there. I mean, just things change after these things. Columbine, that was everything changed after Columbine, because we used to have a surround and call out, something like that. You would just arrive there as patrol and go, oh my God, this is terrible. You better call the SWAT team, and we're going to just hold our positions. So you don't, unfortunately, learn these things until they happen. And then being brutal with yourself and saying like, these are the lessons learned. Some of them are very painful lessons learned. I have to say, I think that agency involved in the UPS thing, it seems like they did as best as they could under those circumstances. Will there be takeaways from it? Will there be improvements? Absolutely. They'll do that. They'll dissect that stuff and try to see where could we have improved this? How could we have prevented any loss of life if possible? Like, they're going to be harder on themselves than any civilian out there. Civilians are looking at it through, a microscope that looks like a straw, and they're looking at it from the Hubble telescope view and saying, we get it. There were some mistakes made, but this is human nature. Mistakes are always made. Yeah. This is a dynamic, fluid, tactical situation that we control. And just watching their tactics versus some agencies currently that would be smaller and more less prepared, their tactics would be subpar to what was actually employed there. And then again, something like a Columbine actually dictate it changes tactics. Before, that was always surround and call out, and the SWAT team would come, and 45 minutes later they'd all show up with their kick-ass stuff on and go in and handle business. Well, there's nothing to handle at that point. It's all done. And so that's what started active shooter responses. The first drill I ever went to as an active shooter response, we went to a middle school and we sat there with half of our department on a training day, and they talked about, here's what we're going to expect of you going forward. If people are in a school shooting, we're going to expect you to go in there and handle it. Like, you're not going to wait out by your car until the guys with the better uniforms show up. You're going to go get it. And we're all like, what? And I mean, like, that's cool, but whoa, Jesus, that changed everything. And I remember as actually a school resource officer raised his hand and said, this is not what I get paid to do. And most of us turned and looked at him and were like, the fuck do you mean? That is exactly what you get paid to do.
Yeah, I'd say most civilians would tell you you're wrong, bro.
Yeah, but hey, at least we know that's the way that guy feels. And so from that point, that was pretty early on in my career. And from that point on, we have now gone down a completely different path in response to that. And the equipment that we carry just on patrol, if it's not even issued to you, some agencies issue like some pretty high speed stuff now to patrol officers. But if it's not issued by your agency, do you go out and buy it? Do you receive extra training? Do you go prepare yourself for the day? Like, hey, this isn't always barking dog complaints. Maybe we go to something truly horrendous that none of us could have ever envisioned. But I guarantee you, every agency that's ever had some sort of active shooter incident never envisioned anything like that. But fortunately, in the last, we'll call it 15 years, we mostly all prepare in some fashion. We discuss it. We prepare for it. There's training involved in it. So we're more prepared for that stuff. But then things like these things happen and you go, how do we prepare ourselves better for that if it ever happens to us again? Or how can people from around the country learn from what we did well? But let's not pat ourselves on the back because some of that is dumb luck. Let's actually be brutally honest with ourselves and what did we really fuck up here? And how can we prevent people from doing that down the road?
Yeah, I think a lot of let me think. A lot of agencies probably took away something from after that whole, what is it, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting? The shooting in Florida at the school where the school resource officer waited outside while the shooting was happening.
Yeah.
One, I think that didn't hurt the image that hurt the image of your average police officer, because I don't know if the average police officer would have gone in there or not, and done whatever, had to be done. But it also, like, I don't know, it's a tough call, man. Like, it's easy for me to be like, why didn't you fucking go in there and stop those dudes from shooting? But at the same time, I think the gentleman was like an older gentleman. I think he was like he was pretty old. And
let's just be honest.
I mean, he should have. I 100% think he should have went in and done what he's supposed to do. And that's coming from, obviously I was in the Marines and stuff, so that's easier for me to say. But if I'm like the average Joe, yeah, you pay the guy to go do that, but at the same time, you gotta, like, how can I be like, you should have went in? Like, I wouldn't have gone in there and done that. As the average Joe, me as myself, I would have done. But
let's
I don't know, man. It's a tough situation for you guys.
It's and you face this in the military. Not every military person is suited for combat. There's people that definitely should be using a typewriter and not out on the front lines. And so you self-identify as that. And
you just showed your age. You just said typewriter. Look at you.
We used to type reports when I started.
Typewriter. What is this type device?
Yeah, it makes clackety noises. You push it back and forth. But, it's the same in law enforcement. Like I said, that school resource officer that said that in that briefing that day, he is that guy. So, number one, I'll make the argument that kind of went back to my earlier point. We shouldn't have that old of people there. Like, honestly, in my first agency that had school resource officers I know we had them in every high school, and I think we had one that bounced around to middle schools, or we had a couple that bounced to middle schools. And so, and this is a population of about 100,000 people at the time in a city. So it's a good sized city. Like they were not the cream of the crop. They're not the high speed go getters. Like these are the people you want. They're the people that want to go hang out with. And I'm being pretty blatant when I say that, because some of them are good people, but like, they're hanging out with kids all day. That's not like where most people's cop career trajectory. It's not where you really plan when you're in the academy. Think, what could be my ideal career path? Let me go babysit high schoolers for skipping and stuff. So you got to look at.
Is that normally an additional duty, or is that normally like that's your full time duty?
No, that's your full time duty. That's what you are a school resource officer. So so. You go into that's another career track you can go into. And it's typically people that patrol was a little much for them. It was a little high speed or you're older and it's your kind of retirement gig. It gets you through the last 5 years, or maybe you're at retirement age and you just don't want to retire. So you're hanging out there longer than you even need to. And that's exactly what I see when I see that guy. On top of that, he's a fucking coward. I mean, your whole life, you're pretty sure that stuff's never going to happen. And you really honestly hope it doesn't happen. But you are there for that. You're not there because a kid has cigarettes in his backpack. You're there for that. And that one day that you had to go do anything, you actually
do your job.
Yeah, he did everything but, and I mean, and it's showing because he's being criminally charged for it. What he did.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
I knew he was fired. I didn't know he was being criminally charged for it.
I think I've seen that he's being criminally charged for it. So whether or not it goes to fruition or not, but yeah, he was definitely fired as a result of it. And so you look at that and go, not only did you, like, inaction is one thing, but actually running the other way and doing all the other stuff you should have done besides that, that's just identified somebody that doesn't need to be in law enforcement, in my opinion. Because you can work for a small agency or you can work for a big agency. And I guarantee you don't think this stuff's going to happen to you until it does. And all of the stuff I've been involved in, I didn't envision happening in my career. You picture the big stuff. Oh, man, North Hollywood, if only that ever happened. But that stuff's not going to happen to you typically. So, but the minor stuff, the fights, the shootings, the gnarly stuff we're involved in, that's where you either excel or you don't. And unfortunately, that's one of the things that an FTO program is designed to do. Are you going to be here and step up when it's time to help me handcuff this unruly person, or be in the gunfight of our life, the gunfight of the century in North Hollywood? You know, like they're just varying degrees of being capable. You know, a guy wants to get squirrely while you're handcuffing him. Does your partner step up and help you, like, snatch him up, and so he doesn't fight more? Versus that guy at that school, it's just the same thing. I guarantee you that's the same guy that would have stood there with his thumb in his ass while you're struggling to get handcuffs on somebody. And we see time now that's the positive and negative of having so many video cameras out there, is we get a lot of stuff put into our feed of ineptness, scared, hesitancy because of maybe some political pressure of worrying about using force. But all that aside, and something as egregious as that school shooting, there's no worrying about force. There's no nothing. That guy just wanted to save his own ass at the you know, the detriment of children. And that's really, you know, we all hope that's our day never going to come there, but it did.
For sure. I've heard some agencies say that they've actually enjoyed having body cams because it's proven that they are, you know, obviously doing the things that they're supposed to be doing and actually showing how big of an asshole the average citizen is that they're dealing with. You know, it's made a lot of people look bad, that not police officers. It's made a lot of average people look bad because they go out there and show their ass, or you have other people that are testifying that something happened when it clearly didn't happen, and you have a body cam footage to back it up. Do you like the body cam thing? Did your agency participate in that? And do you think other agencies in the country should? Do you think that should be a mandatory thing?
I don't know that I would go so far as to say that it should be a mandatory thing, because when you mandate something, then you have to be able to uphold that mandate. So I think if your agency can afford it and can deal with it responsibly, then it's an asset for you. I got into law enforcement before that stuff was available, and then my agency had the first in-car cameras. It was literally a VCR mounted in the trunk and had a VHS tape. And yeah, so my car got one outfitted really early on as part of that test program. I never personally minded it, and this was before there were cell phone cameras and everything. So we were the only thing recording out there, other than the odd like security camera around there. So it was really a novel thing, and a lot of people were worried about it or concerned. I think they have to have some very, very important policies in place on how they're used. Obviously, just even how the evidence is stored. That's evidence. You can't just erase it at the end of your shift. So we had to book the VHS tapes in. I mean, it was a big thing with that. And even though today's day and age, it's digital technology, it's still a massive infrastructure thing. My last agency, the in-car cameras were all digital, and when you pulled into to the station area, they had Wi-Fi hotspots, and it would download to it. But they were slow. They didn't work. If you left your camera on for 2 hours at a traffic accident, that's 2 hours of HD video that's got to go stream and stuff. So it's not just as easy to say as like, here's a body-worn camera, put it on and go forth. You're also violating people's right to privacy when you walk into their house. So you're recording their private environments. And there's been some court cases that come out there as far as what's releasable. I mean, even the show Cops started to get in some legal hot water for being in people's areas where they had a right to privacy and being filmed. So body worn cameras, they're not just as easy as saying like you can just release the footage, because you can't. It's people's private stuff. There's HIPAA violations if they have any type of medical stuff going on. There's right to privacy stuff. There's domestic violence stuff. If you're the victim of domestic violence, there's all kinds of procedures we have to follow to protect their identity. There's actually forms we have to use to redact their names from stuff. So now their face exists on a body worn camera. So I like the technology and I like what it is offering. I think from a lot of perspectives, I never cared about being recorded because I know what I'm saying. And if I say something that I shouldn't, I got to own that if it's caught on camera. We all started wearing digital recorders back in that day. So we had the contacts recorded and stuff. And if I say it, I say it, you know, so you got to own that. And I think if you're out there doing things you shouldn't be doing and you're worried about it being caught, that's a problem in and of itself. The flip side to all of these cameras are they're very limited, narrow field of view. They are not what you see. And so they're not what your field, your vision is. And so when you say you can't see a gun, no, the camera can't see the gun. The person's eyeballs could. So they're not accurate. You know, it's a different.
They're out of context.
Yeah. So I think it's a great added tool from the learning aspect. It's great to have this amount of footage available to dissect what is going really, really well and what is going really, really wrong, and learn from other people's critical incidents, because you might work for a small agency and big stuff doesn't happen regularly. So having all of this different footage now from multiple angles, you know, like all the cars have them, a lot of people have them on their bodies. That's a lot of angles to capture an incident. So it's great from that perspective. But it's not the be all end all panacea of like, well, if I put a body worn camera on every officer out there, then they don't commit any crimes, they don't do anything wrong, and it suddenly cleans everything up. You can look at that video and use it for good or evil. And that's my inherent concern with it. And that's why the policies need to be so strict. With my last agency, we opened a new jail, and it had an extremely good camera system. I mean, like, state-of-the-art crazy camera system. And we had a correctional officer sergeant that would come in he was on day shift, we were on night shift. He would come in and watch the tapes at night and call us in and talk to us about how we did our cell checks, he's like actually hitting us up for violations of stuff, because he's watching what we're doing after the fact, and he can't see exactly what we're doing, but he's trying to discipline us based off that stuff. So I know the agencies, when we started with our car cameras, we had to be really careful on how sergeants could just pull that stuff. They can't just pull your tape and go, let me see what you did all day. It had to be based off of a complaint generation. And then when complaints are generated, is this just somebody calling in and complaining, or is this an actual written complaint, which then as an officer, I have certain rights to be interviewed if it's a written complaint that can lead to discipline, criminal action, or termination, you know? So it's more complex than just throwing a body worn camera on people, but I don't think anybody's going to argue that they're a bad thing. I mean, Jesus, everybody that has a cell phone has a camera. So if you're out there as an officer saying, I don't want to be recorded, I want the recording that I have access to right off the bat. That's what I like, is I can go back to the station in this super rapidly evolving event. And I'm like, okay, I remember the big stuff. I remember some of it, but like, what? I can play this stuff back. And it's not like I'm writing a report to cover stuff. It's, I need to write it accurately. And some of this stuff you don't capture in your brain on like face value. So what exactly occurred, and can we get all this stuff to be an accurate representation of the events? My memory coupled with video, coupled with audio, so I know specifically exactly what was said. There can't be any discussion on it when this is on tape. You said this and I said this. It's just factual. So I think that's a really good thing, as long as it's done well. And it's but like I said, there's if you're out there practicing law right now, you're going to be recorded, whether it's by you or not. Somebody else.
Yeah, it's 2020.
It is. Yeah, let's all be honest with ourselves.
Well, yeah, And like I said, I think a lot of agencies have said that it's just shown that overwhelmingly majority of their officers, like every incident is almost all done correctly. Like the level of misconduct by police officers that people thought they were going to uncover with body cams just never came to fruition. So, and I understand the pluses and minuses, and I get what you're saying about it being taken out of context, because there's stuff happening off camera that you can't see, and now we have to take that added into like the camera footage added into like the report. You said, So
my
you said you
concern
said
with it all is that when you look at it, there are people out there that are judging this stuff that don't know what they're talking about, and that's the problem. We have this footage available to us, whether it's cell phone or whether it's body worn camera, and now it's all subject to review by people that don't understand how to do the job. And quite frankly, it's shocking. The enforcing laws and using force on people is an unsavory thing. Like the application of force on another human is brutal at times. It can be from the lowest level of, hey, I need you to sit the fuck down and mean it. And the person does. That's a pretty low level of force. And in some agencies, you can get in trouble for using the F word to somebody. But by gaining compliance, I didn't have to fight them, all the way up to an officer involved shooting. And people really recoil from that. And that's really the Pandora's box we've opened with the footage, no matter where it's coming from, is you now get to see the unsavory parts of law enforcement. And the joke I heard a long time ago is like, everybody loves sausage, but nobody wants to see how it's made. And that's really with law enforcement. And really, frankly, there's a lot of administrators out there that either skirted that stuff their whole career, they avoided conflict and moved up the chain, or they just simply forgot about it, or they're also trying to protect their own job and coming out in a climate that says, hey, I don't agree with that stuff. And it's like, yeah, but I remember when you were fighting people in the jail too. And so when you just show video of fights in a jail cell or on the street, sometimes it's brutal. It's like sometimes in the process of trying to handcuff somebody, if you're punching them in the face 2, 3, 4 times, that's really tough to watch. But that level of force used and then handcuff somebody, and then there's nothing more. Like that fight didn't get out of hand. They didn't get tased. They didn't get hit with a baton. They didn't get shot. Like, yes, it's tough to see that stuff, especially in a day and age where most people don't get into fights in school. It's a much kinder, gentler society we live in for the most part, except that people forget there's still evil amongst us. There are still people out there that are intent on doing you harm. And those people don't live by the same rules as the general populace. So you have the general populace looking at these uses of force and recoiling from it. And they don't understand because they could never fathom the person that force is being used on. It's necessary. Granted, some of it's egregious, some of it's overboard. That's all fine. But I'm telling you, most of the stuff I see out there, I'm like, oh, Jesus, that's a fight. I don't have a problem with it because that's what it requires. But the general populace does. So it's an interesting time to live in with that stuff. And I don't really know how to rectify it, quite frankly.
Well, people love to judge from afar, and you have to you have to be found not guilty in the court of Facebook opinion. And if you're not, if you're found guilty in that highly coveted court, then you're fucked, and you'll get your name out there, your family, your address, people start doxing you, and it's it's a weird world we live in, and there's a lot of judgmental people that, like you said, have zero idea of what the actual job entails, what interactions with human beings entail. People that never leave their homes or interact with anybody other than like maybe immediate family are
they've never
dictating
been in a
on
fight.
how you detain that crackhead that was fighting you for a while.
They've never been in a fight. Then not only have they never been in a fight, they've never been in any type of violent altercation. They've never even been confronted. The biggest thing that they might have had is like somebody cut them off in traffic, and from their cars they flipped each other off, and you felt really heated about it, or somebody stole your parking spot and you yelled at them through the window. And that I'm not being cavalier when I say that. Like, most people have never faced confrontation in their life of almost any form, and much less been in a fight. Those days are over of fighting in school and stuff like that. It just that stuff doesn't happen. When I was in the academy, they were talking about you guys are the first generation of people to grow up. There's a large portion of people in here that may have never been in a fight in their young adult life. Like we're in our late teens to early 20s. And you grew up in an age where fights in school were as lowest as they've ever been. You've never been in a fight. And now you're going to go out into a populace that is extremely willing to fight you. They did not grow up under these same circumstances. They've fought their whole lives just in their own environment. And they're extremely willing and able to fight you, to either just get away, which is one type of fight. Like, I don't want to go to jail. I'm going to fight you. But as soon as I break free, I run away, versus I'm going to fight you and kill you. Like, that's a whole other level of fight. And most people can't even form a consciousness about that because it's never happened. Like intimate physical contact where this person had the ability to run away during this fight and they didn't. They want to stand here and kill you. Like, that doesn't happen for the most, thankfully, that doesn't happen for the most part.
Do you guys get a lot of follow-on training for like hand-to-hand? We call it hand-to-hand combat.
Sure.
I don't want to call it that because it's not necessarily what it is, but like, do you guys get training on that? I know some agencies have their officers like participate in like jiu-jitsu and stuff like that. Is that something that, that you see a lot of people across the board doing, or is it kind of on the individual officer to, go out and better their own skills for like shooting and hand-to-hand like interactions and stuff?
Yeah, like with a lot of answers tonight, it depends on the size of the agency and how progressive you are.
Yeah.
And a little bit of both. Pretty much any academy setting is going to have some sort of arrest control, is kind of what we call it, your hand-to-hand type stuff. How to perform like joint manipulations to handcuff somebody safely, some baton stuff, not really boxing type of stuff or whatnot, but some basic. There's a few methods out there that most academies teach of how to control people while you're handcuffing them. And then usually the baton stuff is kind of the sparring stuff, if you will. And that's probably going to be across the board. And you can see in some of these videos out there from small, very underwhelmed agencies, that's probably all they ever got in the academy. And their in-service training would be extremely minimal and extremely lax. And you can tell that in the way that they are fighting. They're unskilled. All the way up to agencies now that are incorporating some jiu-jitsu based stuff, some grappling techniques. As that stuff became of age, obviously as officers, we have to respond to that now. There are a lot of very trained people out there that are very skilled at getting a hold of you and hurting you. It's not the old, let's stand in the middle of the street and try to knock each other out. Like there's some serious stuff out there. So how to respond to that, how to respond to somebody that has enough training to choke you out. You're in big trouble if they get a hold of you and get you in a rear naked choke or something along that line. So how to protect yourself from that. The more progressive agencies are addressing that and trying to go down that road. You always have to balance that with injuring your own staff during training. So it's really hard to do that. And you have a varying level of competency and fitness. So you have people that are extremely fit and extremely competent on one end of the spectrum and relish that type of stuff. And then you have people that are extremely out of shape and extremely incompetent and either always have been or let themselves get that way. And those are not the people that are going to show up and perform on training day. So that's the crowd that you're trying to train during those training days. And the trainers do a pretty good job. The ones I've seen, they take it really seriously because they know they're training you for the worst day of your life. And they act as such. And they don't really appreciate people fucking off during those training days because you may think it's not a big deal, but you could have to use this skill. And that's not the time to brush up on it, is when you're getting your ass handed to you. So, and like everything else, if your agency isn't providing it, that should be something that maybe you look at doing. Maybe you should involve yourself in some sort of grappling, jiu-jitsu type stuff. It's extremely effective for controlling people, if nothing else. And, as that has become more popular, it's available to you if your agency isn't providing it. Now, whether you can use that stuff because it's not a legally taught practice in your agency and how you could get in trouble for that stuff, there is that side of it. But hey, if you're in the fight of your life, that's not the thing I'm worried about at that time. So
yeah, I never really thought about that. How they're not like legal holds and stuff like that for you to use against somebody else. That's crazy. I never even really thought about that.
So like the rear naked choke in MMA, what we call the carotid restraint. It's it's your arm around the person's neck, but you're not concentrating pressure on the front. You're constricting the blood flow to their brain and causing them to lose consciousness. Some agencies, that is not an approved technique. You cannot do that. You would be using excessive force if you did that. And then other agencies, like my two agencies, it was an approved technique. Given whatever level of force that fell under, if you met that level of force and you used it and you were justified in using it, you could to render the person unconscious long enough to handcuff them, and then all the other stuff that came after that. So, the old school, like everybody carried the big mag light flashlights. If you hit somebody with that, that's not an approved striking device. That's not an approved impact weapon. So, not to say that people.
Oh, really? I thought that's why they. Yeah. I thought that's why they carried that big ass one.
Some agencies it was approved, but there were other agencies that is not an approved impact weapon. You don't train with it during training days, and if that is your go-to thing for cracking people never over the head, then you're not using a department approved impact weapon. Now, if the guy runs at you and that you just have to defend yourself and you hit him with the only thing in your hand, that is something you need to articulate in your report. But that's much different than saying we train to hit people with our big metal flashlights. There's a lot of legalities with that stuff,
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I want to talk again, or we never really touched on it. You said that you worked with some kind of helicopter unit doing search and rescue and doing other policing. What exactly were you because I've seen like helicopter fire units, that go out and like there's like small brush fires. They do that. How does a helicopter? Were you in a unit where you're like reacting to crimes, or was it just like a flying around, overhead watch of a crime scene kind of deal?
Yeah. Hey, let me run to the bathroom really quick. I'll be right back.
Oh, that's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be right back. All right. Way better.
Yeah. I can be fine. So the question was, if you could just tell us kind of what your helicopter unit did, like what was the role and responsibilities of that?
So we were fortunate enough to have both. The agency that I worked for, we go from the Sacramento County line, which is very urban, and we go up I-80 here in California to Lake Tahoe. So we actually have a lot of mountainous terrain. We have part of Lake Tahoe in our jurisdiction, and we have a ton of ski resorts. And so we have almost up to 10,000 feet elevation all the way down to like sea level kind of stuff in the Sacramento Valley. So, and then because we were right next to Sacramento, we actually had kind of a reciprocal arrangement with them where we would all stagger our flights. So they would cover us when we were down. They would cover us when they were down. So we got to go down into Sacramento and help out a lot. So very, very urban enforcement. So that is a true law enforcement function, like what LAPD air support would do. They're just patrol. That's what they do. They chase bad guys. The stuff you see on TV with them in pursuits, following it with the searchlight and using the cameras and foot pursuits, all that stuff. So we had that, and that's when I got into the unit. That was the initial function. Our unit started as military surplus helicopters, and we had volunteer military pilots to staff them, and then we had deputy sheriffs on board to do the law enforcement role. And it was a great way to start a unit. We had the helicopters. Obviously, nothing in life is free, but they were from the military, and so once we got them up and running and put some money into them, and then technology upgrades over time, more radios, better equipment, bigger searchlights, better cameras, we were able to improve that role. But with that original helicopter, it was an OH-58 for everybody in the military.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I was getting ready to ask you what it was.
Yeah.
So it's a Kiowa.
The OH-58. The Kiowa. They took obviously all the armor and everything out of it, but they're a very underpowered helicopter. And so when you're in the middle of the summer going up into the Sierra Nevadas high altitude, our search and rescue stuff was extremely limited. And it was mostly limited to, hey, we found the person, they're down there, and maybe we could go land and find them. One time during a blizzard, we actually found two skiers. They had been out for over 48 hours in a blizzard. They were in really, really bad shape. We found them during a break, and we could not take those two guys and the pilot and myself all back. So we made the decision for me to stay behind so those two guys could get flown back. because they're in really, really bad shape. And what if we can't get back to them and we left a victim out there versus I have some survival training now. I have winter survival training. I have the equipment. I'll be fine. Just please come back.
They know exactly where you're at. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully. And come get me in a couple days at least. Don't leave me out here too long. So that was what our limitations were at that time. It was extremely limited, but based on our geography and our demographics in the county, we were always doing search and rescues. We had a lot of stuff during the summer of people injured. And the California Highway Patrol had a helicopter out of our same airport that was much more capable. And they had to go out and do a lot of our rescues for us because we couldn't. Their helicopter was better at it. So we begged and pleaded and scraped together the money. We had a donation by the local Indian casino, and we were able to purchase a very capable helicopter. And it had a hoist on it. It had a hook on the bottom for doing long line stuff. And it was, at the time it was delivered, it was the most technologically capable single engine helicopter in North America. We had the best stuff on it. It was really kick ass. And
what kind of helicopter was that one?
They changed the name now, but it was called a Eurocopter B3. And
okay.
So it's the most common one you see out there. Like the air tour operators operate it. It's like the Ford Super Duty of helicopters. It does everything. It's not the best at anything. Actually, down in Southern California, LAPD and LA County Sheriff fly it for their patrol helicopters. It's that helicopter. So nice big cabin, sliding doors, great visibility, really good power for going up in the mountains with a lot of weight on board. And like I said, not the best at everything, but we could do everything with it. Hueys are better at search and rescue, but you can't fly those on patrol. So, it's we have to go from one moment flying patrol down in the urban areas and chasing bad guys to going and doing a search and rescue call. Sometimes without even like landing to reconfigure, we just go. And so we would have enough stuff on board to do that. If we had to do an actual search and rescue, we would pick up another crew member to do a 2-person crew in the back with the hoist and stuff. And so we had to start that whole thing from scratch. Once we got that helicopter, we were in really over our heads at that point. We wanted this thing, we begged for it, and they gave it to us. And then we were like, shit, what? Careful what you wish for, you know? And so then we had to go actually seek out a company that provided hoist training. And then you realize all the ways you can kill yourself doing this. We kind of thought it was, not as tough as it seems, but there's a lot of ways to really, really kill yourself doing that and the people you're trying to rescue. So it became really, really a different unit at that point in time with our infrastructure needs, our personnel needs, what we had to do for training, what we had to do for equipment. And so, in a shift, I went from being involved in a pursuit to going and landing in the mountains and carrying somebody back to the helicopter on my back and hoisting people and doing, it was crazy. It was super cool to have that variable of a mission just based on where we happen to be located. LAPD doesn't have that mission because they have the fire service there, the LA City Fire and LA County Fire, to handle any rescue stuff. They don't do an ounce of rescue stuff. LA County Sheriff does, but their patrol division is their patrol division. Those are their own pilots, their own what's called a tactical flight officer, a TFO. They're assigned to patrol. They don't even go into the hangar with the big search and rescue birds in it. That's different pilots, different helicopters, different staff in the back, and that's a whole different function. So they even separated in that fashion where they're doing two different crews are doing two different things. So for us, we had to be good at it all because very, very different mission sets in that world.
Yeah, I know. I used to go up into like Mount Baldy and stuff like that. It's in the Angeles National Forest. And they have to, I think they were telling me in the summertime, they have to rescue probably, I think twice a week, the helicopter gets used to rescue somebody up there in the San Bernardino Mountains and stuff like that up in that area. Just because of the people think they come out of LA thinking like, oh, I'm a hiker. I put it on my Bumble profile and I put it on my Instagram. I'm a hiker. I'm going to go up here and hike on this mountain. Then they don't realize, oh shit, I'm lost. And I have no idea. I've run into so many people. I'm like, dude, you're going to die out here. Going hiking up east of LA and it's just crazy. So I can imagine why they're always being used for rescue and stuff like
Yeah.
that. It's really
LA
interesting
County
though.
Sheriff actually has a station on Mount Baldy. They'll park that one of their Air 5 helicopters on top of
Yeah.
Baldy. And then my buddy's a San Diego County Sheriff helicopter pilot down there. They have 3 or 4 Hueys now. I know they have 3. They do fire. So we didn't have that mission. They have fire mission as well. So they have fire down there, and then they do search and rescue. And they're actually, their back crew is Cal Fire people. So my friend Tony is a helicopter pilot. He is a San Diego County Sheriff deputy, and he is a Huey pilot. And then he flies Cal Fire people that are stationed there with them, and they do the rescue. They run the hoist. They go down and do the rescues. And like you said, they are always busy. They got people going out to I think it's called Three Sisters Falls down there, and people have no business being out there. It's a pretty significant hike out there. They take a tiny little bottle of water and hurt themselves and all. So he's super busy down there as well.
The people, it just blows my mind. I've seen people. I go to there's this one hike I like to do. It's called the Bridge to Nowhere out in LA and the Angeles National Forest. It's like, I think on the All Trails app it says it's like 8 miles or 9 miles, but it's, if you do the whole thing and there and back, it's over 10 miles. And I remember one time I went out there, and I'll go out there and camp overnight, so I'll bring all the stuff so I can camp and everything. And I always carry a water purifier because I'll just pull water right out of the river, that way, instead of carrying gallons of water with me while I'm hiking out there. Yep. And I remember one time I went out to the bridge, and it's this bridge that was built in like the 1920s, and then some flood came through and destroyed the road. And there was another road that had already been built, so they looked at that and they're like, there's no reason for us to fix this, so they didn't. And now there's this like standing bridge. It's over 100 feet tall out in the middle of nowhere. Like you have to hike out to it. And on like Saturdays, they bungee jump off of it. They hike out to it and bungee jump off of it. But anyway, I go out there, and I remember sitting under the bridge by the river, and this old gentleman and his like girlfriend or wife or whoever came down, and they were sitting down there too. And I saw this dude like finish a liter bottle of water. And I'm like, and he had to be in his like mid to upper 50s. Mm-hmm. And, when we're good 5 miles out from the trailhead, which is another 30-minute drive from the cell phone coverage because you're up on the mountains. And I'm like, hey, man, you need any more water? And he's like, no, I'm good. I'm like, do you have any more? And he's like, no. I was like, here, man, I got this water filter. Let me pump your bottle up, like fill your bottle up. And he's like, oh, I really appreciate that, man. Like, I'm like, dude, it's 80 something degrees out here right now. And you're in your upper 50s, and you're on this trail that's not strenuous really, but it's still 5 miles in the heat of the day and, and that dry heat. And I remember filling that up, and they're like, oh, I really appreciate it. Oh, you must be some kind of country boy, And I'm like, no, man, I'm just like a experienced hiker that, doesn't want to die out in the woods. I don't know. What do you want me to do? And then I remember hiking back, and 3 different groups I stopped and filled up their water for them because they all brought like a little like gas station bottle of water, and that's all they had. One kid, I was like, him and his LA girlfriend, you could tell she had the big ass sunglasses and like the spandex shorts, and like, just looked like she was should not be in the woods. I'm like, hey man, you guys need water? And he's like, no, we're good. I just filled up out of the river. And I'm like, yeah, you should probably filter that, man. I can filter and fill you up. And he's like, no, that's good. I looked at it. I didn't see anything floating in it. And I'm like, oh my God, dude.
Yeah.
Oh my God, you're going to die out here. You're the reason that you guys, rescue guys, are so busy because of morons that come out and I don't know. And Mount Baldy's like every year there's multiple fatalities on Mount Baldy, especially the, what do they call it? The Devil's Backbone is a spot where you, when you're heading up to the peak, in some spots it's only a couple feet wide, like 2 to 3 feet wide, but you have a couple 100-foot drop off on both sides. Yep. And people always slide off that in the wintertime that are inexperienced hikers that go up there. And man, it blows my mind. And I feel bad for the rescue crew sometimes because, you're having to deal with idiots like all the time, having to go out here and put yourself in a shitty situation.
Don't ever feel bad because it's what we live for. Like,
I think it'd be a cool job.
In the moment, you're like, what the hell were you thinking? But you're like, I have all of this training and all of this equipment, and thankfully people go out and do this stupid shit all the time, and I get to go do my job. So it does suck, but if everybody was sane about it, all that stuff would go away because you wouldn't need it. So hey,
did you ever have anybody complain about how you rescued them? Like afterwards, like, what the fuck, man? I didn't, like.
Oddly enough, our very first rescue, The way our unit worked, if you were the crew, we were all trained to do everything. So I could run the hoist or I could go down the hoist. So we all had to be EMT or above level to be able to provide care. So it was just kind of like who got to the hangar first, who was going to go down the hoist. So our first mission, I happened to be the person to go down the hoist, and it was for a lost skier. And he had been out over 24 hours, and we found his tracks and ended up following him and found him. So I get hoisted down to it, and I'm like, hey, I'm here to save you. And he goes, cool. And he goes and grabs his skis. And I'm like, no, you got to leave those here. He goes, no, I'm not leaving my skis. And I was like, no, you got to leave your skis. And he goes, no, I'm not leaving them. I go, well, you don't seem to understand. You're not taking those. I can't hoist you up and with your skis and get them in the helicopter. Like, they're staying, dude. He goes, I'm not going then. And I went, I'm looking at him with the helicopter hovering over my head. And then you're faced with that kind of, well, shit, now what? Like, I'm the guy that doesn't want to be rescued because of his damn skis. And all I told him was, that's fine. I'll now 5150 you, and you're coming with me anyways. And he's like, what? And I go, yeah, I don't think you're making good decisions based on where you're at. I don't think you're able to care for yourself. So are you putting?
Yeah, you're obviously out of your mind.
Yeah. I mean, because that's what you're left at. Because you're left like, okay, like you're in a legal quandary right now. I cannot force this guy to get in the helicopter, but I sure as hell can't leave him. I mean, he's miles away from anywhere. He's not close to civilization. He's not going to make it back to a road, especially the way he's going. There is nothing for miles. He'll die. And he had proper clothing on to be out for a night, but you definitely don't want to spend another night or two there. And then now he's out of food. He doesn't have water. And so he may think he's okay, but he's really not. And so you like, in that moment, that's one of the things we didn't train for that. I never thought of that possibility of somebody saying, I don't want you to rescue me now. And you're like, okay, well, I can't just grab him because I say so. There's no say so clause.
Yeah.
I'm the law. You're not looking at my badge and you have to do what I say. He's not. And so that would be my only recourse. And sure, is it a bit of a stretch at that point? Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, dude, you have been out there. You didn't just go missing for the afternoon and you're heading back to the road. Like you're in bad shape. And I'll definitely make the argument that for the 5150 clause, you're unable to provide for your own care. You're mentally disabled right now based on your current condition. So, would I have wanted to get in a fight with that guy to put him in the helicopter? No, but like I was pretty convincing to him at that point that he's going and he left his skis there. So, we had a lady that, her and her husband, their quad rolled down a hill. They didn't get hurt on that, but in the process, I think they kind of got scuffed up on that, but they weren't bad. And so the ambulance left. The ambulance head back up the road, and they decided to winch their quad up with their truck. And they're in the truck while they're winching the quad up. Well, they winched their truck off the cliff, and they went about 800 feet down the side of a mountain.
Oh, geez!
Ejected her out. And he came to rest in the truck about 200 feet farther down the hill. And I mean, they're like fucked up now at this point. So,
I imagine
comes back out there. They do a whole thing. They get down to them finally, and there's no way they're getting them up this hill in any timely fashion. The ambulance got stuck on the road, so they couldn't even get more equipment into where they were at. So they were having to shuttle everybody in by UTVs and motorcycles and stuff. So they're not going to be able to ground extract them out in any timely fashion. And she had some pretty decent injuries to her, probably a head injury and stuff. And so we hoist her up, take her to the ambulance, come back, get him, and take him to the ambulance to land and offload them to the ambulances. And I want to say, like a month later, we get asked by our lieutenant, what happened? Give us a rundown. She's wanting to file a lawsuit for something, including the rescue, that you guys were diligent in your duties or negligent in your duties for some reason. Nothing happened to her during the rescue. It just, if anything, she got put in our lift bag backwards. But that was an internal thing. Like, hey, you guys screwed that up on the ground, but wasn't a big deal on our end. It didn't do anything to her. Didn't cause her further injuries. but I think she thought we should have all done it way faster or something. It went away. Nothing ever happened. But that's the thing I did hear. She was going to file a lawsuit. So they really wanted to know like what we did and how we did it kind of thing. And I was like,
people are assholes, man.
Yeah, we're like, well, we could have left you there. I mean, everybody could have went on that road and scratched their head and went like, well, sucks to be you, you know. And I mean,
could you imagine the PR nightmare if you would have left the dude with his skis? Like, sorry, man, if you don't want to be rescued, we'll bounce. And then he ends up dying. They'll be like, you were out there. You should have taken him. You know, like, you're wrong. You'd be wrong on both points. You know,
what's going to happen? Liability. I'm weighing liability. The liability of me forcibly putting this guy in a helicopter against his will, that's a liability versus leaving him out there in the wilderness in the snow, and it's getting dark and there's a storm coming because we almost couldn't go out there and do our rescue. And had it gotten a little windier, we would have had to abort it during that hover anyway. So it was like not a great situation. It wasn't a clear spring day. I mean, there have been situations where we've rescued like an injured mountain biker, and we told the rest of all the other guys like, "Hey, we want rides out of here too." We're like, "No," but you're not injured. Yes, you rode 8 miles out here, and you don't want to ride back, but it's not cold. You're not in danger. You're not in any distress, and the safety risks of us doing multiple missions to come get you and give you a free ride that far, and I'm sure they want to take their bikes to you like that. We're not doing that, so. What take the engine?
Is it a free ride?
Yeah, if you're a county resident, you don't get charged. If you're out of county, you could be charged. We could charge your county for the rescue in California. So
but the individual wouldn't get charged though.
No, not when it's a governmental agency. If it's like a private air ambulance, you definitely get charged. But you don't get charged for that stuff.
See, I was always under the impression that if you had like a helo come rescue you out there, like you're going to get a bill on the back end of that.
No,
I didn't realize it was, that's good to know.
I mean, it's government. It's like what it's there for, you know,
that's one of the good things about it, I guess.
What you pay taxes for is to have stuff out there.
How often have you ever been called out and someone that was like a hiker or somebody out in the wilderness that used a rescue beacon?
Yeah.
How often, how accurate are those? Do you have as a rescuer, did you have a preferred one? Is there like one that you're like, hey, this is really reliable. This is what I would recommend to my sister, you know, if she was asking about one?
When I was doing this was probably 6 to 7 years ago. So the technology improved. They had Spot back then, and it was
they still do,
accurate. A lot of times we would use cell phone stuff because we could figure out your coordinates off of your cell phone. Those were pretty accurate. The challenging part, you guys in the military know this, is there's a lot of different coordinate systems out there, and it's not all the same. So somebody can give you their latitude and longitude, and you go there, and you are not anywhere near where they're at. So the other big thing is people move all the time. So they hit their spot, and that's where the location was, and then they keep moving. And by the time you get up there, they're 2 miles away. So I think they're good. I don't personally have one that I can recommend. Probably something like the Spot, whatever their current generation is, would probably be pretty decent. You know, cell phone stuff, you can always tell where you're in the app on an iPhone. It will pull up your latitude and longitude. If you use the compass feature on your phone, it will give you your lat long at the bottom of that. So shoot that. And we did all kinds of stuff. We would have we could send text messages from our helicopter. We could do a lot of really tricky stuff in that thing.
Yeah.
So.
Some of the more expensive ones now will let you do that, where you can text back and forth. There's like different levels. There's like the entry level one, which is probably $100 to $200, where you just hit the button and you're hoping someone received it and they will maybe arrive at some point. Then there's the one where you can send pre-recorded responses, like I need help, I'm immobile, I'm like whatever. So you can be a little bit more specific, but you still can't receive responses. And then there's another level where you can text back and forth, but that's like hundreds of dollars. And I think they have subscription fees because most of those run through some kind of satellite phone companies and stuff like that. That's how they work generally. But I've considered getting one because I do a lot of solo hiking. What's that?
I think they're a great idea. I would probably, if I was going to go with one, I would go for like that second level you described that actually allows some different pre-recorded messages kind of thing. I think from a rescuer end, it would let me know that this is a real thing and not an accidental activation. The one that just goes off and says, I need help. Well, did you hit that or did your dog step on it? Like how did it get activated? Is it an accident? If we don't get anything else from you, it's like, we're still going to go. But if you have the ability to send 4 different messages, then we go, oh, well, shit, this is a real thing, and each one hopefully has a little bit better fix on your location and stuff. So I think for solo hikers, definitely it's a technology worth investing in. I will also throw out there, especially for the crowd that isn't as skilled as maybe you are, or people that do have a military survival type background, the lower your skill level for self-rescue or self-sustenance out there, probably the higher need for something like that. The less time that you can spend out there on your own without somebody saving your ass probably infinitely raises the time that you need somebody to come save your ass. So, if you're that standard person that's got like half a water bottle and no sunscreen, you probably should carry one of those. And versus that person that's like, hey man, if I get lost, I'll find my own way back. If I spend the night out here because I didn't intend to, my fiance and I, we mountain bike all the time now, and we're super into that. And I've told her, like, just up near where we are, if you go out in the late afternoon and you get a mechanical issue on your bike, like 10 miles down the trail, you're not making it back before dark. So maybe we need to talk about some fire starting capabilities, like a Mylar blanket kind of thing, because you're in your afternoon mountain biking attire and then you're down in a canyon that could drop down into the 40s, and you're not going to die, but that's not going to be a super comfortable night. And so maybe being a little bit more prepared for stuff like that. I know even like our Garmin GPS on our bikes now, they actually have a crash mode on it that's alert. It senses some deceleration in the bike and it'll actually trigger an alert that goes out through your phone. I mean, assuming you have cell connection and stuff, but that stuff gets better and better all the time. So there's a lot of really cool technology out there nowadays to help with that stuff. So
yeah. Well, so we're going to have to do another show, man. We haven't even talked about dog handling. We haven't even done anything like that. And I was PTSD. before we cut off here, because we're at almost 2.5 hours, and I know some people, aren't going to listen that far into it. I do want to get it out there though. Everyone's in lockdown. Everyone's in quarantine. So as a canine handler or somebody that trains dogs, what's a couple like basic skills that people could work on, while they're sitting at home, not doing anything, that kind of transcends all different breeds that, you can work with?
Man, I would say that the biggest thing that our business deals with, if I can just generalize dog behavior, is dog is out of control. So our business model for pets is a slightly different than your standard training out there. We always say we don't focus on obedience in the way that we focus on mindset more. The reason I say that is, you can have a dog that has a really, really good down, and if he's whining the whole time he's laying down and he's barely holding on by a thread, you can't take that dog out in public when we have a public to go out into. You can't enjoy him at a coffee shop because he's always looking to break his down because he's not calm while he's laying there. So we actually emphasize calmness. We really work on the behavior of the dog. We're using obedience to get there, but that we don't just stop at the fact that he downed because we told him to. We want him to be relaxed. And so I think right now during this whole unprecedented lockdown of the world, that would be one of the biggest things. Everybody's home with their dogs and family way more than they ever are. And they're probably learning that their dog is not fun to be around with them present. People forget that dogs are very lazy animals. We actually have a client that she's a vet tech, and she said they're getting tons of calls now where people are like, hey, I'm really worried. My dog is like sleeping all day. I think he's sick. And they're like, no, he's a dog. That's what he's done for the 10 hours.
That's how a lot of animals are.
That if you leave them alone, they're very boring creatures. But we all come into their lives. We give them a ton of affection, a ton of intensity, a ton of arousal, and then we deal with the after effects on it. Those are the dogs that are barking all the time. Those are the dogs that are jumping on people. Those are the dogs that are just generally not fun to be around because their behavior is out of control. And it's no different than raising kids. If you want to take your kids out in the world and enjoy them, well, they have to be good little humans. They can't be running amok in the restaurant and because you won't have a good time. So treat your dog the same way. You can love them. You can care about them. You can appreciate them for what they are. But first off, we have to always remember they're dogs. They're not humans. And no matter how much you love them and how much you put a sweater on them and how much you feed them table scraps and steaks, like they're still a friggin' dog, and they do dog things, and they view the world as a dog, and they respond accordingly. And so if you can understand that and respect that, I think the best way to live with a dog is being very respectful of the fact that they are a dog. And when you understand how they view the world and what they care about, rules, structure, hierarchy, those type of things, they thrive. That's our whole business, is taking in dogs that are not good in the home and changing them around. And then really more importantly, teaching the humans, like, how did we do this? It's not the training. It's not the like, oh, I taught your dog to sit and suddenly he's a different dog. Like yeah. I told him what to do and I expected him to do it. That's the difference. And if you can't do that, you won't get the results I do. So our whole training program towards the end is how to get these dogs to behave with their owners, how they did with us. And really that's like having a leadership a relationship with them, loving them, but also like really understanding that dogs thrive with these simple things in their life. And it's not always petting and cuddles and stuff like that. They actually thrive with a lot more independence and like an acknowledgement of that you really care about them, but I don't need to spoon you because you're a dog.
I don't need to. The people that carry their dog in a little bag with them everywhere they go, it's like, I have a wiener dog, he's a small dog, but I do not put clothes on him. I do not carry him in little satchels and stuff. I don't get it, but
pound Dutch Shepherd and they're both dogs. As far as they're concerned, they're both dogs, but that little 7-pounder, he has a freedom and an access to us that the 90-pounder doesn't have, and you have to acknowledge that. Like, I love that little dude, but I have to remember that he can sit next to me on the couch. He can be next to me on the chair. He can be in my arms in ways that the big dude's not ever going to be. And while I really like that, I like his proximity and I like him being a part of my life in that fashion, I can really fuck him up by treating him as such. Like I can make him dependent on me in ways that are not healthy for a dog, just because he can be next to me all the time and I never let him have his own little identity, and I pet the crap out of him and stimulate him and maybe feed into some of the neuroticisms he has because I'm not paying attention to when I'm petting him and stuff. I mean, you see it all the time. You see these little yappers walking down the street, and as soon as they go like, the owner picks them up and they're like, oh, stop. And you're really telling that dog, yeah, just keep doing that. That's exactly what you should be doing right now. And we don't get that because we live as humans and these dogs are in our life. So, yeah.
So just like a basic, let's like one basic issue: dogs barking at other dogs when you're walking home. How can the average person? Because just that, I think it would make a lot of people happy. What can you do to make your dogs stop barking at dogs as you're walking by them?
Tell them don't. Correct them.
Don't do it, huh?
Yeah, people are really abject to corrections these days. Using the word punishment, people's eyes light up when I say punishment. And it's like, yeah, but punishment takes all forms. I mean, when I say punish a dog, people are naturally assuming that I'm trying to kick him across the room, when in reality, I could give him a glance that says, don't do that anymore. Or I could withhold his ability to touch me. Like, he comes running up and wants me to pet him and I don't. That is a form of punishment for the dog. So it's not like this heinous animal abuse situation. For walking a dog, the best thing that you can do is use the proper tools. And for us, the proper tool for everybody out there is probably a prong collar, the thing that looks like a heinous torture device. They used to call it a pinch collar. It fits properly around the dog's neck. It puts the least amount of pressure on their throat if we're trying to prevent injury to the dog. The way that it actually moves around the dog's neck and where it concentrates force is up on the sides and the top. There's actually a mathematical schematic out there that shows that. And with the least amount of light leash pressure, it will impart the biggest amount of communication to the dog to say, don't do that, or come this way, or don't pull on the leash. So when you're walking along, put a prong collar on your dog. When you're walking along and it's pulling, pop it back and say no and heel, and teach it to heel. Make some turns. If it keeps going the way that it's going, when you make a turn, give it a little pop on the leash, heel. And the dog pretty quickly learns, I'm supposed to follow where you are, and I'll walk better next to you. And then now that you have that under control, as you're walking down the street and your dog turns and starts firing off on another dog, stop it on the prong collar? No. And it's like, oh, Well, shit, nobody ever said that. All you had to ever say was stop doing that. And I
be the alpha.
Yeah. Yeah. And really, honestly, to even kind of talk about that, we don't even really use that term anymore because it's a pretty like antiquated thing in the wolf world and stuff. And it's dog like hierarchy is way more complex than that. But we have to acknowledge they're hierarchical animals. That is how they see the world based on a hierarchy.
Yeah.
And you need to be in charge if you don't want the dog to be. Like somebody has to be. And the really complex thing about it, to make it easy, is most dogs are not the alpha. They don't want to be. They hate it. You guys in the military know this. There's people that absolutely do not want to be higher levels of leadership. They wouldn't even excel at it if they came running in and like, you know, PFC nothing, and you're like, hey, junior, no, nothing, rank 0. You are now in charge of this whole thing. They'd be like, that's not me, man. I don't want that. I excel at that. And you suddenly thrust them into a leadership position, and they would fail miserably at it because of who they actually are. And no amount of training ever would ever change that for them. And dogs are the same way. We kind of classify them as like upper ranking, middle ranking, and low ranking dogs. And the middle ranking and low ranking dogs are the ones that are out there struggling in the world because they're left to make all these decisions and they don't have anybody telling them what to do and what not to do. And they struggle with that. They're on an island of choices, and they have to make them all themselves. And they really don't want to. Dogs are not like humans. Humans typically don't like being told what to do. But in dog world, they actually do. If they know I'm not an upper ranking dog, there's no headbutting there. The alpha dogs, the higher ranking dogs, those are the big like protection dogs that we train and stuff. Sure, they're super dominant, and then there's some headbutting that goes in that because they want to occupy this space, and you're like, well, I kind of need to occupy that space because I have to be in charge here, and we're fighting over the same last rung on the ladder there. But the rest of like all the pet dogs, they're not trying to do that. The way people say like, oh, my dog's the alpha. No, he's the alpha of you. But that dog is not an alpha in our world. He's not dominant in any way, shape, or form. He just runs the show on you. So if you tell that dog what to do, they go, hey, I got it. That makes sense. But really, the dogs that struggle a lot are the ones that are like, hey, nobody's telling me what to do, and I got to make choices, and I'm not the type of dog that wants to make choices. And if I do have to make choices, I'm going to make ones that suit me, and those are typically not choices that people like. That's the barking, that's the reactivity, that's the aggression from fear. They're going, I got to solve these problems that you're not handling, and this is how I know to solve them. And humans don't really like the way dogs solve problems, so it's simple but complex. But you know, as with everything in this day and age, it kind of goes back to like just asking for what you want. You don't have to be mean about it. You don't have to be unfair. You don't have to be cruel in any way, but simply telling a dog, hey, could you stop doing that? I want to enjoy walking you, and I don't enjoy walking you. And when I don't enjoy walking you, you don't get to go for walks. And then I don't enjoy you more. And then pretty soon you never go on walks with me because I hate your ass. And that's like really not why people get dogs. So
yeah. All right, man. Well, I think we're, like I said, we're about 2.5 hours. So I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm definitely going to have you come on again, because I know you got more stories, and we didn't even touch on a lot of stuff. We just kind of broad strokes of everything. So it was a really good conversation. Again, you're the first non-military person I've had on the show. So I appreciate you coming on. I'm actually the second non-military person I'm interviewing, and like my cousin in about 8 hours. It's going to be 4:30 in the morning here. She's in Italy. She lives in Milan, Italy. And she's going to talk about what's been going on in Milan. Because that's one of the hardest hit areas in Italy for this whole COVID-19 thing. But I appreciate you coming on, and we'll link up again, and I'll have you come back on, you know, if you want to, in a couple months or something like that. And just, now that you've been on once, people can listen to the episode and maybe ask some questions to get some more specifics and stuff for the next time you come on. But I appreciate it. If you want to,
and everything that needs to be discussed.
Exactly. Yeah, we didn't even get into any of that.
Yeah, dude, I'm all for it, man. I appreciate it.
Do you want to shout out any kind of like your business name or your Instagram or anything like that? This opportunity or any organizations?
Yeah. There's a couple of them out there, but those ones I mentioned, those are some cool Instagram accounts to follow. We're Gold Hill Canine. We're on Instagram and Facebook. That's my dog business out there. I'm part of a group up here called MTB NorCal, MTB_NorCal. It's a MTB Northern California advocacy group. We're out there doing some stuff. I also run a page called Advantage E-Bikes on Instagram. It's just my page to have some fun on my e-bikes that I've been out there exploring and stuff. So those are where everybody can connect with me. You can follow me on Facebook if you want. It's a private account, but if somebody wants to add me, they're more than welcome to. I don't do much on it, but you'll see us on Gold Hill and the MTB NorCal, and especially that Advantage e-bikes. You'll see our different flavors of stuff. And yeah, we'd love people to be part of our community and check us out and have some fun.
Sick, man. Well, this video should be out as soon as we get done. I'm going to start editing it, and hopefully it takes a couple hours to upload it onto YouTube because I do it in high def. So it should be out in the morning though, for you to check out. And if for some reason someone asks some questions or something, which I encourage on the YouTube video, then I'll let you know. That way you can go on there and maybe respond to anything if there's anything pertinent. But again, thanks for coming on the show. I hope you're staying safe during this whole coronavirus thing and stuff like that. You and your family. Yeah. We'll all get through it. We just got to wash our hands and stuff. Well, it's about to be. The next 2 weeks is going to be rough. The next 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to start seeing some major amounts of fatalities, and I think the general public is I don't know what they're going to do, to be honest, because it's going to be shocking for a lot of people. I think for people, especially for people that aren't prepared for something like this.
That'll be super interesting. Yeah.
But anyway, man, I'm not going to take up any more time. Again, appreciate you coming on, and have a good night.
You too, man. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this and look forward to doing it again. And thank you for doing this for the guys out there that need this kind of stuff, that need a platform to listen and relive and work through some of their stuff. That's what Rob turned me on to your podcast for. And I think there's a lot of people that are getting a lot of good stuff from your thing. And so from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate you doing that for, I know it's military focused, but I think even people in our world are going to get a lot out of it. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of it, and thank you for doing it. Appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that people are getting I'm glad to hear people are getting stuff out of it. That was the goal. So no problem on my end. All right, man.
Cool.
Have yourself a good one.
You too, buddy. We'll talk soon.
Later.